was an unusual seating situation. Thank you for joining us for tonight's working session between the Town Council and the Planning Commission. Planning Commissioners, thank you for joining us tonight. So what you have all received the agenda tonight, and basically, it's an opportunity for us to just clarify some working items that we both are responsible for. We'll go over roles and responsibilities. We'll utilize residential design guidelines and the commercial issues as examples. But the overall goal is that we all be on the same page so that as applications come forward, we have the context and an understanding of where both the Planning Commission, the Town Council, and our staff is working from. I don't anticipate making any changes to policy decision, but there is an opportunity to identify areas for future improvement that we can put on the agenda. So again, it's primarily just a working session between the two bodies. And so for those that are in the audience, to maximize the amount of discussion that we have, I am going to go through the working session first. I'll introduce Dr. Spano as our facilitator, and then we will have time for verbal communications as well as public comment at the end. Okay? Okay, and many of you must recognize Dr. Spano. He's been with us not only for our North 40 study session, but also for our priority setting session, and he will assist me particularly as I have cough drops in my mouth as we go through tonight's session. Dr. Spano.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor. So I will take just a couple minutes and get us organized in terms of the context for the evening and how we'll be spending our time together. So picking up on what the Mayor just mentioned, the purposes for tonight's working session, there's really sort of two big broad purposes. One is understanding and alignment, being on the same page. So that is really sort of a key focus here tonight. We'll talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities and how that all plays out between Commission and Council. The other part of the meeting tonight also involves getting a little bit more specific and drilling down around understanding and alignment on the appeal process and then residential design guidelines. And so we'll tee those topics up when we come to them, and I have some questions that I'll ask. Tonight's session is a dialogue. It's an interaction between Council and Planning Commission. So my role here tonight is to ask questions, tee up questions, facilitate the conversation, make sure that the group stays on task and on time, and that if you do digress, I'll check in with you and bring you back into where we need to be in terms of the process. And I'll work with some ground rules in just a minute. Actually, I'll just mention those right now. One of the ground rules is be concise. It's a big group here tonight, and so if everybody can keep their comments brief, say what you need to say, but keep them brief, and then that creates space for other people to participate, because we'd love to hear from everyone tonight. So that's really the key ground rule tonight. Be concise, and then that opens up the possibility to maximize participation among the group. So with that said then, I think we're okay. Oh, the one other piece that we will do after we work through roles and responsibilities, the appeal process, and residential design guidelines, when we do tee that up, it would be great to talk about some specific examples. Staff has given me a couple examples that this might be useful, so we're not just talking in the abstract, we're talking concrete. That could be very helpful. And then when we do work through all of those, then we will conclude the meeting. We'll have public comment at the end, but we'll hear a brief presentation on economic development as it relates to land use, and so that'll be about a short 10-minute presentation, and then the implications and impacts on economic development, particularly downtown, on land use issues, which might result in some things coming in before Commission and Council, and so you'll be aware of that and what the context is and what the economic framework is coming into that. So with that said then, I think we're ready to jump into roles, relationships, and responsibilities. So is this okay for everybody in terms of our plan for the evening? And I know you've seen the agenda and had a chance, and I know Tom has had a chance to see the agenda, and the mayor has, and I know everyone else, and they've given me some feedback along with staff. So let's just jump into it. We'll start with roles and responsibilities. And I'm going to turn it over to Joel Paulson, and Joel's going to talk a little bit about, it's like a flow chart, right, Joel, in terms of the process with planning staff, planning commission, and council.
Yes, thank you, Sean. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So I have a really rough flow chart, and actually I will pass some around because it may not be very legible up on the screen. So we will pass those around, which will generally go through the planning process. And so generally, staff gets involved really early on, even before applications come in. So typically, staff will be contacted by applicants or their representatives, either at the public counter during our counter hours, or via email or phone, inquiring about potential projects and what they want to do. So staff generally gets involved at that point. And then ultimately, an applicant determines whether or not they are going to have a project to move forward, and then they submit an application and the plans along with any other development fees that are necessary. And so depending on what type of plans are submitted, and this flow chart really, just for some background, is really more for the DRC or Planning Commission process. There's another process that's discretionary as well, which is our minor residential application process, but it doesn't actually go to a public hearing. So this will stick more with the public hearing language. So once an application is submitted, then a planner is assigned to that application to be the project planner. Typically, within 3 weeks, we go to what's called our staff technical review meeting. There, someone from planning, building, fire, and Parks and Public Works Engineering will have reviewed the application and the materials, and then they would provide the applicant at a staff technical review meeting with a list of deficiencies and or comments that need to be addressed by the applicant and or their team. That meeting is really a working session. It is not a public meeting, so that is a working session with staff and the applicant. It's an opportunity to have a dialogue and more of a conversation around the table. And so we go through that process. And typically, these are technical deficiencies with the plans. They are comments such as, you may have to do architectural review, environmental review. You make sure that you've spoken with the neighbors so that they can be informed and you can address issues that they have. So there's a long laundry list of issues that get dealt with at that time. And so we mentioned usually there's additional technical studies, whether that's environmental review, traffic impact analysis, arborist, architect, geotech. Those are some of the typical technical studies that we see with applications. So from there, we get the application, and typically they go through multiple iterations of staff technical review to address those comments. And then as projects evolve, other comments are brought up at additional meetings. But once we get to a point where the application is technically complete, we have enough information to make a determination as to which process it's going to go through. Then staff makes that determination. The community development director makes the determination. Some things are mandated by the code. So in the town code, there are duties and responsibilities for both the development review committee, planning commission, and council. So some things have to go to the planning commission and or the council. There are some items that can be approved by the development review committee. So we go through that process and make a decision. And so from there, it would go from the development review committee or planning commission, and they would conduct a public hearing. Obviously, at those public hearings, for planning commission, we look at staff prepares a staff report, as you've all seen before, and then you hear from the applicant, neighbors, and staff at that meeting, and then you render a decision. Really, from there, the process goes, typically there's generally 4 outcomes from a planning commission hearing. It's either project's approved, it's approved with modifications, there are times when it will be continued with direction, and then the last is the project is denied. So if a project is ultimately denied, then there's obviously appeal rights going forward to the town council. The planning commission is ultimately an advisory body to the council on a number of items where the town council is the final deciding body, such as general plan amendments, zone changes, conditional use permits that have alcohol associated with them. So once it goes through that process, and I will say if there's no appeal and the project's approved and it's a single family house, for instance, then the next step for an applicant would be to submit building permits and any other non-discretionary permits that are required to move forward with construction. So the Planning Commission, if that decision is appealed or if it's a recommendation to council, that information will be forwarded to the council. The council will conduct a public hearing as well. They will have the benefit of all the information that was provided to the Planning Commission up to that point and any additional information that was provided to the Planning Commission. And so at that point, the town council, would have conduct a public hearing, and then they ultimately would render a decision. From that point, again, similar, there's, either they may approve the project, they may approve it with modifications, they may remand it back to the Planning Commission if they feel that's appropriate, or they could deny the project. If it's denied, then obviously the applicant has to decide whether or not they want to resubmit a new application and go back through the process. And if it's approved, again, it goes to the building permit process. So typically the staff's role is really to do all of the technical review, get as much information so that Planning Commission and or council can make an informed decision. We look at the existing general plan, other policies, the zoning ordinance to make sure that it meets all of those technical requirements, and we make interpretations from our objective perspective, and then we provide those. The town also has, for items specifically that go to Planning Commission and council, we have an application process agreement. So this agreement lays things out like, staff and any consultant's recommendations are not binding on either the Planning Commission or council. Those decisions are at their sole discretion. And so that is something that we want to make sure folks know up front. It also goes into the appeal process for the town council with the one of 3 findings that they have to make if they end up going that far. And so we try to make people aware of the process and next steps, inform them of that as early as possible. So we do, and I think it was 2014, I believe, we implemented that process to try to cut down on a little bit of the anxiety that comes with going through the towns and any application process in any other jurisdiction as well. The idea that, staff is the ultimate binding decision and our recommendation is the final word. And so making sure that they understand that that's not the fact, and that's not the case here or in other places. Ultimately, the council is the legislative body, so they ultimately set all the policies that Planning Commission and staff follow. And then they also look at the legislative actions that they have purview over, which again is general plan amendment, zoning code amendment. So it's kind of that hierarchy, and there's also, the way I look at it is there's a little bit of a hierarchy of discretion. We look at it as staff kind of has the least discretion when it comes to application and applying policies and guidelines. Planning Commission has a little bit more, and council obviously has the ultimate being the policy setting body. So that's kind of a brief overview of the process. Again, I didn't think that was going to be very legible up there, so I will conclude with that just in general.
Excellent, very good. Thank you, Joel. So let me ask commissioners and council any questions about roles, responsibilities, about the process that Joel laid out. And just raise your hand, and then we'll just work through a speakers list. So yes, Commissioner Henson.
Thank you. Mr. Paulson, my question was about CUPs. My understanding of CUPs is it's not going through this process per se. It has a little bit of a different process in that any CUP has to be approved by council regardless of the Planning Commission's decision. Is that?
So that's not it. Only alcohol related.
Only if
conditional
it's
use
alcohol
permits.
related. Okay.
Otherwise, the Planning Commission actually has the decision-making power over all other conditional use permits. So it is a similar process, but it's other than those that have alcohol, Planning Commission is the deciding body.
So if it doesn't have alcohol and the Planning Commission denies it, then the applicant has to appeal it.
Correct.
To council. Okay.
Excellent. Commissioner Birch.
Probably a simple question. I was just thinking about timing on this. So how long, in your opinion, and let's just say a residential, single-family residential, let's not go too difficult. When you get the plans from the applicant at the beginning, how long does the technical review and the comments and everything, how does that usually take? Again, single residential.
Sure, single-family flatland house with
Yes.
no environmental review typically is in the 4 to 6 month range. A lot of that is really dependent on the applicant and their development team.
Right.
Like I said, we do our initial review usually within approximately 3 weeks of receiving the application.
Okay.
And so we look at that and they get that initial list of comments, and we have some applicants that have short lists, and so they're able to turn that around quickly. And we have other applicants that have longer lists and it takes them a little bit longer, and or they have outside consulting architect or arborist review that has to take place. So those kind of lengthen the time. But the biggest factor is how long it takes the development team typically to get that information back absent technical reviews.
Can I ask one quick
Oh,
thought?
absolutely.
When you're doing that technical review, does the fire department also do a review simultaneously at that time?
The fire department does for access and for water supply only. So they're not doing their final fire review that they will do at building permits.
Right.
Similarly, the building department, it's really kind of the standard. You need to get building permits. You got to meet these codes, and any other specific things that they have that might be out of the ordinary, they try to catch at that first level, but that doesn't always happen.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So this is good because remember, the main purpose was understanding and alignment. So this is excellent, and just in terms of making sure that you have your questions answered and you're aware of what the process is. Other questions around roles, responsibilities around the process? Is there any clarification, additional further clarification needed? And I recognize that this was review obviously for all of you, but it might have jogged some things perhaps in terms of raising some issues, and if not, we'll move forward. Then let's go ahead and move forward. Okay, next topic on the agenda is the appeal process. And so we'll take up the appeal process and we'll talk about that for as long as this goes, as long as you need to, and then we'll move into design guidelines, residential design guidelines. So let's start the appeal process by reminding ourselves what the 3 rules are, the requirements, the criteria for an appeal. And Joel, you just want to walk us through those 3, and they're up there on the screen.
Sure, and the full code language for this section is submitted in your packet. But ultimately, and this specifically applies to decisions that are appeals from the Planning Commission to the council. So these apply to the council when they hear appeals. So the 3 findings are that there was an error and abuse of discretion on part of the Planning Commission, that there's new information that was submitted to the council that wasn't readily available to the Planning Commission, or there's an issue or a policy over which the Planning Commission did not have discretion to modify or address. So generally, those are the 3 findings, one of which needs to be made to grant an appeal for the council.
Good. So questions about the 3 conditions? Yes.
We've had a number of actual cases where it's come back through a couple of times. And I know we're trying to balance the needs of the town with the rights of people who want to develop or something like that. Where do fees come into play, particularly if there's repeat loops in this appeal process?
So that varies, but typically, if the project is remanded back to the Planning Commission, let's say, then they would pay a remand fee, which is less than the full application fee, but it's intended to cover staff costs to go back through that process. If a project is denied and someone comes back through, then obviously they have to bear the full fee to go back through that process. But typically on appeal, and some of them we actually end up doing time and materials to try to reduce those impacts, because that is an impact, not just fee-wise, but it's generally just the time it takes to go back through that process through the Planning Commission. And some of those, I think you recall, ended up back at the council. So they were at least 4 hearings.
So if there's another loop and it goes back, another remand and another appeal, do they pay the full fees for that second loop?
Well, the remand specifically has, and I think it's 50% of the fees that they pay for remand. I don't have the fee schedule in front of me, but they pay a lesser amount because there's not as much work, depending on the direction given by council or the changes from a staff perspective. So technically, we would be able to deal with that with less staff resources. But they would have to pay additional fees, but it is not the full fee necessarily.
Good, excellent. Commissioner Birch.
I have two questions.
Yes, yes.
Out of these three, which is the most often used for an appeal? What do you see the most?
I wish I had objective data on that, but I don't.
Maybe one of the council members.
Yeah, you
Wait,
tell
wait,
me.
Go ahead, Mayor.
And maybe I'll frame the issue.
Doing that earlier when they were testing it.
Here with the microphone for some
Maybe I'll frame the issue a little bit with my experience with 30 years of dealing with public agencies. This is a very unique findings. Almost all jurisdictions have it where it's just a trial de novo and they don't even have to make a finding of these three. So it's been unique in my 3 years now that I've been here and seeing it used in the deliberations that council has to go through. I think it's got a great place because it really makes you, council, really think about the decision that was made by planning commission and really have to, go into the thought process and come up with a reasoning why. But at the same token, there's words in there that aren't defined anywhere. What's error? What's the abuse of discretion? What's the reasonable available? And so those are the areas that, this is on my work product, so that's what I wanted to hear a little bit about too, is not only which one do we use, but maybe not so much from council, but maybe not so much from planning commission, but from council, where do you see this language and when it's used and potentially what changes could be made to clarify it? And then I think it's important when it comes back to planning commission and that's another section where we talk about when it comes back, whether that should be a de novo or whether when something comes back to planning commission, it should be really limited to the exact areas. And we've had that in the last year because it wasn't specifically said by council. We did it de novo at the planning commission. So those are kind of to frame some of the issues we're looking at. How can we make this process in the appeal process better? Because I think we all have realized there's been some that have been pinging around. So.
And Mayor Sayoc had a comment, and then Vice Mayor Rennie, and then we'll move over here.
And the three criteria that was listed here is actually one of the reasons why we thought having us meet face-to-face was a good idea. One of the benefits of talking with other municipalities is that their appeals process has language very clear on what the steps are. And with the new information, I know I've been looking at number 2 quite a bit. And that's where I feel that as a council and as a commission, there's almost like a reset button. Like if we come to some consensus on what new information reasonably available means, that we're able to then stick to it and make sure that that message comes across to our applicants so that there's no gaming the process, which happens from time to time.
Good, thank you. So let's go to Vice Mayor Rennie and then Commissioner Kane and then Birch.
Thank you. So, I struggle with these three findings because I find number 2 really the only one that's very useful. The wording for number 1, the Planning Commission error or abused discretion. I think all the council members agree the Planning Commission works very hard. They're all very capable. The last thing we want to say is, they made a big error or they abused something. So it's really tough to use number 1, I think. Number 2, but there's times when we don't agree with their decision, so then we're struggling to try to find, okay, how do we grant the appeal? And we don't want to go say they abused something. So then we're usually looking for some kind of new information to do that. Sometimes there isn't new information. And number 3, an issue or policy, of which they didn't have discretion is a tough one. I've tried to make motions on that before also, and it's kind of a tough one to use. So for me, these three don't give the council much. It's difficult for council to move ahead, I think, when we want to.
And so it's constraining in some way.
Yes. And maybe it's supposed to be. I'm not sure about that.
Okay. And thank you for that. And as the mayor said, and we'll go to Commissioner Kane and Birch, as the mayor said, there won't be any motions tonight to let's do this as something new. That's not the purpose of the meeting. But talking about improvements and getting them out on the table, and we can take notes on those and take them up in a different form at a different time. That's absolutely part of the process tonight. So it's identifying what the issues are, and then if there are improvements, let's hear those tonight, and we'll absolutely record those. So we're on to Commissioner Kane and then Birch.
I'm going to defer to Commissioner Birch because I think she brought it up earlier. She wants to talk about the gaming, and I'll follow up if necessary.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Commissioner Kane. Because I also see this as an opportunity, we don't all get together as two groups to say, hey, we hear this, and then we get confused on our end on what's happening. So, an example would be, something comes to us, we deny it. We do not feel that it has met with neighborhood compatibility, and we don't feel it meets the design guidelines. I understand that can get a little fuzzy gray in different people's interpretations. So that's why I'm using that example. So they appeal, they go to you, and then we wind up finding out as we dig through the information we get from staff and we find online, this looks different than what came to us. And so to me, that doesn't feel like an appeal. That's a new application, but it's going through this other process. And then the only way I feel like you guys can hear it is, okay, new information, but to me, when you've changed the drawing, new information to me is, hey, we got a different traffic study, or we got a little bit more information from the arborist. But when they start changing the drawings or the design, to me, that's not new information. That's a change. So then, yeah, you're stuck at saying, okay, I guess the Planning Commission made an error or something. So number two is where I think myself, and I don't want to speak for my fellow commissioners, but we have had these discussions, we get a little bit frustrated because I don't feel when they make those level of modifications that this is an appeal anymore. And I do also think, exactly like Vice Mayor Rennie said, it kind of backs you guys in a corner of trying to figure out where does this fall in this decision making. So if we were going to look at down the road, I know we're not making any decisions tonight, tightening this up, I would like to see, number two, what new information is applicable for an appeal and what tips the scale to, I'm sorry, that's actually a modified application and you're going back through a process.
Good. So we have Commissioner Kane, and then Councilmember Jensen, and then Commissioner Badami. Thank you.
About 10 years ago, I served for 4 years on the Planning Commission, and recently I've been on for over 2 years. You hear things on the street, you hear things in the room, and hypothetical case, the architect or the developer is faced with 5 items that the Planning Commission feels needs to be addressed, needs to be modified. And the application is turned down, so the moving party appeals to town council, and they come in with plans where 3 of the 5 are revised. And if I should say to that man on the street, what are you doing? He says, well, I think we got a better shot with council. So the gaming that I'm concerned with is people learning the regla de jeu, the rules of the game of, gee, if I slice it a little bit here, I think council will go for that. And, I start being concerned that on occasion, there's a con afoot. And you can smell it, you can see it, but I can't say it because I'm not allowed to say that. But sometimes there is a game afoot, and sometimes we run the risk of losing some of the tools that we have vis-a-vis that game. It may come up again that this was done or that was done, and there's an erosion of what it is we can use to protect the town. So readily and reasonably available, if a applicant revises his plans to potentially curry the favor or win approval with council, I wish I could be Solomon and tell you which one to do and which one not to do, but if the revisions are seeming to be of the game, that should maybe be referred back to Planning Commission. And I do oppose, as we all do, some of the rules we have where it goes back and back and back and forth. And council would want to make a decision as opposed to having things go back and forth. But sometimes maybe that's why it happens that way, believing that council would make a decision. So I don't have an answer for it, but it is of concern to some of us.
Thank you. So we're Councilmember Jensen, and then Commissioner Badami, and then Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you. So I've been a planning commissioner and a council person. I was on the planning commission twice. And I recall a time, way back my first time, I'm not going to say when, where every single thing, no matter what it was appealed. So the planning commission really was not a body that was viewed as a body that could make a decision. And it was just a way station on the way to the council. And I've seen that more now, especially if the planning commission, which they used to do, and I've seen it recently, would you like to go on to council? So without having the planning commission actually go through the process. So I'm a fan of our rules, and I think it's up, frankly, to the council to read them for what they mean and implement it, because I think it's a failure of implementation. So if I look at, number one, an error or abuse of discretion, well, the planning commission has the luxury to follow the rules. The council doesn't. They follow the policy that the council gives them, they apply it, they look at all of the guidelines, they exercise their discretion, and they have the luxury to follow the rules. If they make an error in doing that or they abuse their discretion, it's not the same as on an appeal of saying, I disagree with what they did, and therefore it's an abuse of discretion or an error. No, it's if they misapplied the rules or didn't apply the rules, or which would be an abuse to my mind, or if they misapplied them would be an error. So it's up to the council to say that's what happened. With number two, to me, that one's an easy one because it's not readily available. If the planning commission goes and says, lower your house by 18 inches, and they come to the council and they say, I lowered my house by 18 inches, they could always have lowered their house by 18 inches. It was always readily available. So in my mind, that is not new information that was not readily available at the meeting. They've just now said, I've changed it because this is what happened. So to me, that's an easy one. And again, I think it's a matter of implementation by the council. An issue or policy, we were asked to use examples that they don't have discretion over. It might be, I wish we could open a yogurt shop here, and it's really called specialty retail, for example. Or I would like to do something that seems like a good use. Or that doesn't seem like it has enough parking, even though your parking policy says it does. I'm going to deny it, based on that. And whenever it's a policy question, to me, the planning commission can't make the policy. And as a planning commissioner, I was never making the policy, but I was always saying, council, please give us a policy that we can follow because we don't have one in place right now. So to me, those make sense, and I view them as something that discourages the game playing if it's implemented correctly, because then the applicant knows, I have to fit in this, and I have watched the council use these and say no, yes, or maybe, and I don't like the looping, so I'd rather the council actually say, yes, we're doing it, no, we're not doing it, and not have an endless loop, and just have the guts to stand up to say, yep, this is what we're doing. But I realize that politically that doesn't always happen, but I like these rules for myself.
Thank you. So as we're continuing on, do these rules work for you? Do they not work for you? Why do they work for you or not work for you? So that we'll just continue this discussion. Commissioner Badami.
So I'm entering my fourth year on the commission, and I'm going to have to say that I am really proud of the commissioners. I think they all do a fantastic job of vetting the applications. So I don't really see the commissioners being a problem. Quite frankly, we're getting a lot of applications on steroids, so we have a really tough time vetting through them, where we are just kind of a stepping stone to go on to council to see how much more can be whittled away. Well, you guys asked us to bring some examples, so I did bring one, and this is 126 Clover Way, which, when we talk about new information, this was something that was denied by the Planning Commission. I believe it was unanimous. It went on to town council with new information. So this new information is an application that's been reduced by 674 square feet. The exterior materials have been completely changed. It went from cedar siding and stone veneer to hardy siding and hardy shingle. And the roof is no longer a metal roof. Now it's a composition, asphalt composition. It's a completely new house. It should have been sent back to the Planning Commission, but it went before council with new information, and you're seeing a new house. But it did get approved at the council level, so why should the commission bother?
Good. Thank you. So we're on to Council Member Leonardis, and then Janoff and then Spector. Go ahead, Council Member.
Thank you, Dr. Spano. I've thought long and hard about this since the last few comments. And, you know, perhaps a way to dissuade the gaming of the system would be to immediately have one appeal back to the Planning Commission. Based on what Commissioner Badami just mentioned, a lot of times people think that they can perhaps persuade the council with the new information when in fact it may be resemble a brand new application. So perhaps the flow chart needs to be adjusted where rather than have it be appealed to council, they appeal the Planning Commission's decision and it goes back to Planning Commission with the new information. And then it gets one appeal to council. If they can't decide at that point, then council decides and that's it. Perhaps a process improvement. When it comes to the bullet points up there, everyone who disagrees with the Planning Commission decision, whether it's right or wrong, is going to accuse them of error or abuse. That's the way the appeal always comes to us. And then when it comes to us, 99% of the time, it is, well, we have this new information. And the new information can be as described by the previous two speakers, where they might take some square footage off, or they might lower the roof by 18 inches or whatever and try to sell it to you that way. But when in fact it's different design details. So why should it go to council immediately with different design details? It should get appealed right back to the Planning Commission. If they want to do that, take that extra step, change it and do that, that makes more sense and it puts a lot more value on the work that they're doing.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Janoff.
New to the process, so maybe this is a question that you all know the answer to, but who's the gatekeeper for this step in the appeals process? Once the Planning Commission denies something and it goes to appeal, does staff take a look at the new application, or does it go directly to Town Council and they play Supreme Court saying, yes, we're going to hear this matter, or no, we don't hear this matter? Is there a function that someone plays in between to determine whether there's an extensive enough revision that it would warrant going back to Planning Commission versus Town Council?
Pursuant to current town code, it's required to go to the Town Council within 56 days, I believe, of the Planning Commission's decision. So there's not that opportunity to go back. That opportunity is should the council determine finding number 2.
If I may just add, oftentimes we will get an appeal and then essentially a week before it's scheduled and already noticed for Town Council, then suddenly we get new plans. So oftentimes staff doesn't even have the opportunity to really do a thorough technical review of those new plans because we've already set it for an appeal hearing before the Town Council.
Does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up to that?
I'm hoping to hear more, because
Okay.
that doesn't sound like a reasonable process step to me. But
Okay. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. Before I get to my input, I think what she may have been asking is there someone who looks at the substance of the appeal to see if it's really appealable?
Before it goes to council.
Yes.
From a legal standpoint, we wouldn't, from a staff level, be able to make that decision. Once the appeal is filed, like Joel says, we have 56 days to bring it to you. What we can do, though, is based on some of the input and maybe even come up with better language for this, is to be more, I guess the word is aggressive when this happens, to make that a recommendation, to say that there has been new information, and the recommendation from council is to send it back to the Planning Commission, as opposed to letting council look at the new and decide themselves whether it's new information or not. But we wouldn't have the ability, let's say, for example, they file the appeal, and as Ms. Paravetti said, a week and a half before they start submitting new information, we don't have the ability to not allow that information to go to council. We don't have the ability to say, well, this isn't an appeal anymore, it has to go back. We wouldn't, from a staff level, have that ability to do that.
Okay, I was trying to help her out there.
Yeah.
With regard to the question that you pose, which is, do the rules work? I have dealt with appeals for many, many years, and my answer is our ordinance works. So that's fine. And maybe it's because of a legal background, but I find the wording, doable, especially since most cases come in under number 2, which has the least legal terminology of any of the other 3. So I think our ordinances are fine. I think the Planning Commission is great. I can't think of one instance where an appeal has come to us where the Planning Commission has not done a fantastic job. Now we get to where I think the process breaks down. And it's been mentioned, part of it is that the applicant, thinking that he, she, or it is going to get a better shot at the town council, makes minimal changes in order to fit in under number 2. And the reason that they think that is because they have been successful at making minor changes and coming up to the council and being successful at the council to have their project approved. There are various reasons that have been expressed for that. Sometimes it's because of the time involved to send it back to the Planning Commission. Sometimes it's because of the cost involved at sending it back to the Planning Commission. But I think what the council should do is abide by its ordinance, because I think it's a good ordinance.
Thank you. We have, yes, Commissioner Hanson and then Councilmember Leonardis. Yes.
I actually went through kind of all the cases that have been appealed in the last years. And I've been on the commission for a little over 2 years, and it seems to me that the process does work pretty well. When I first joined the commission, I had the impression that there were times when, whenever an applicant didn't like the decision, they would, use the new information and get it appealed. But I feel like the council has done a fabulous job of, being the gatekeeper for that and really checking out the application. The only thing that I'm really not clear on exactly how this works is it's in the ordinance. It says, that if the predominant reason for modifying or reversing the decision is the availability of new information, it's the policy of the town that the application will be returned to the commission for review in light of the new information, unless the new information has minimal effect on the application. So when I was looking at some of the appeals that have been made, there were some times when it came back to us and other times when it didn't. And I imagine it might have been cost or expense or how much time they'd spent in the process, but I was trying to understand like how council decides, yes, it goes back to the commission or it doesn't.
So we might work on an answer to that if council wants to weigh in. So we'll go to Councilmember Leonardis, and you had your hand up, and then the Vice Mayor too. Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. To me, it seems like there needs to be some kind of a limitation about the amount of appeals one can have, because we've had cases up here when it was appealed to council, council sends it back to planning, then it gets reappealed back to council, and then that decision may have or very well could have been sending it back to Planning Commission another time. And to me, it just seems like that's a very cantankerous process. There should be one appeal to council, and then council, that's the final word. And after that, it would be considered a new application. And again, I don't want to rewrite the whole town ordinance. I do like the language, and I understand it exists and how people use it. But I think when something gets appealed the first time, if they disagree with the Planning Commission reason, it should say something like, I disagree with the Planning Commission's findings because of this, as opposed to the Planning Commission erred or abused. And then they would have an opportunity to appeal it to the Planning Commission. And then if they still didn't get what they wanted, they wouldn't be allowed to change everything around and then just give it to the council in hopes of getting it approved. that would be their final opportunity. If they understood that going in, there would be less of that gymnastics early on. So I just like solving the problems at the lowest level of government.
Very good. So, Madam Mayor, and then we'll go to the Vice Mayor.
I think Council Member Leonardis hit the exact thing that I was going to say is like, let's just solve the problem. And one thing that I found valuable was an email today from Ms. Quintana, and I was going to ask Ms. Pravetti if in her experience how San Jose was, because Ms. Quintana, her suggestion was the original design was the one that would be looked at. If it's an appeal, it would be basically you would not allow new information. And I was just curious after reading that if in San Jose, was it that way where you appealed and the appealing body only looked at the design that was originally reviewed? Oh.
That's correct. There was not the opportunity to redesign before an appeal. And similarly, for example, we sometimes have applications that are working their way, and the Planning Commission is the recommending body. So as the recommending body, whatever you saw then was exactly what the town council would see as a zoning application or a CUP with alcohol, et cetera. So there would not be the opportunity to modify the application in between those two steps.
Yeah.
Follow up. And so then my question to Mr. Schultz, legally, with this ordinance language, could we just almost have a change in practice so that the original design that was reviewed by the Planning Commission would be the same design that would be looked at by the council to try and remove the gaming that we were discussing?
You certainly can do that, and that would require, we would take out number 2 altogether, really. You wouldn't even have it available, because there wouldn't be any new information that could be submitted, and that would alleviate that if that's where council wanted to go. Because I think that is the one that they try to say, well, it wasn't readily available because I didn't know that was an issue at the Planning Commission until the decision was made. So how was I able to do that? You use the 18 inches, but they would come back and say, well, I didn't know that's what all I needed to do. Now that I know that and I've appealed it, you can make the decision. It wasn't readily available at that time. So it is a game, but yes, you could, the ordinance would basically say there will be no new submittals allowed. And if there are submittals allowed, then it would have to go back to Planning Commission. That is possible, but not under our current code. Can I jump into my other question?
And then we'll move to Vice Mayor Rennie.
So, and I'll go back to one and just, I'd like to hear from you because I'm really enjoying this actually, is that the error and the abuse of discretion in the situation, what do those words mean in the situation when we've got the single family home where it meets all the technical requirements, the height, the setbacks and everything, but it's denied because it isn't neighborhood compatible, or its bulk and scale and mass is too large. And that gets appealed to council. And they say that was an error because of the bulk and mass is fine, or because of it is neighborhood compatibility. I heard Commissioner Jensen say, well, it's not just a disagreement. But, I mean, I could argue the other side is, well, I think that's an error because they didn't apply those words the way I see it. So, that strict requirement, I think the wording could use a little bit. If we really truly believe that is not an error, just a simple disagreement, that would tighten it up and not allow those appeals to be seen. So on that, whether you see that as an error or an abuse, with that gray language, would certainly help also in tightening up number 1.
So we're capturing these suggestions here in terms of potential improvement. So we have Vice Mayor Rennie, and then Councilmember Leonardis, and then Commissioner Kane.
So building up my thought process here, starting back with the Bella Vista appeal that we did at council, the one by Mr. Ross, not the other one across the street. We went through this whole discussion process in the beginning, and part of it was me, and I think Councilmember Jensen was helping with the discussion, certainly, about and we determined that people have an economic right to do something with their property, and Councilmember Jensen, I think, was arguing something along as well, the economic value could just be a park or something like that. So, but I conclude anyway that people have a right to do something with their property. And my position is the Planning Commission's job is to help people find what is an acceptable project for their property. And much of the time they do that. My 2 years on council, I think I've maybe seen a half a dozen or less appeals, so I'm not sure of, all the examples are completely there. But some of the time, some of the appeals that come to council, what I saw council do was say, somehow the process with Planning Commission didn't get to an acceptable one, and we said, okay, change these more things and it will get to something acceptable, and then we send it back to Planning Commission to work on. In a couple cases, we saw that the process it hadn't been working. It was ping-ponging back and forth, not just, sometimes it's Planning Commission has several meetings, asks them to make changes. Sometimes they come back with a completely new project, and it still isn't getting through. And when I've read through the minutes of the Planning Commission, in some of these cases where I feel like the process failed, I didn't feel like the Planning Commission was really telling them, here's where you must get to make this an acceptable project. It felt like it became, okay, they bring a project and the Planning Commission more or less said no. They, usually bulk and scale, but they didn't explain when does bulk and scale no longer become an issue. And it's not a lot of them. This is just a few of the ones. Again, I said I've seen less than half a dozen. So, again, my thought is if we want to improve the process, I don't know how to improve the process, but I think that's where we're getting into trouble. And you've seen council pull a few of them out of this lengthy ping pong to try to end the process and get to what is an acceptable project. So I'm certainly be interested on other people's thoughts on that.
Thank you, Doctor. To me, the very language of number one, the error or abuse of discretion by the Planning Commission, it implies malicious intent in some respects. Yes, people err, we know that, but abusing one's discretion implies that they have some kind of vendetta and they're overstepping their bounds intentionally. And I think the onus should be on the applicant to come back. We should eliminate that paragraph altogether. Onus should be on the applicant to say, I disagree with the Planning Commission's findings because I'm appealing this because of this, not because they erred and abused, and this is what they erred and abused. We're putting thoughts in their head, and we're telling them what their options are for the basis of their appeal, and then they're making something up, and then they're, in some instances, regretfully gaming the system. So I think that language in general is problematic. I realize it's in our ordinance and it has worked in the past, but the problem is the way it's working. Yes, we can eventually all arrive at a decision, but we all arrive at a decision eventually with it going back and forth, and it takes a lot more time and effort than it needs to take because of these kinds of words.
Thank you. Commissioner Kane, and then Councilmember Jensen, and then Commissioner Birch.
Well, hitchhiking on what the council person said, I will attempt to answer your question about point number one. There seems to be a lot of power in that both ways, to say that we had an ideology or an agenda, and that can be corrected by council using number one. But I think the proof of the problem is how many times has it been used? And I can't remember, help me out, that council has used number one on the Planning Commission. It's there for good purpose. But I don't know see, in responding to you, yeah, there could be a problem, but I don't know anybody's ever used it before. So it's fine with me. It prevents a disaster, but I don't know that it's been used.
And I would agree it's not used by council, but it is interesting, I don't know who made the comment, is every appeal says it was an error and abuse of discretion. And so certainly maybe council has a good understanding of what that wording means, but the applicants do not.
Councilmember Jensen?
Two observations. One is, I think for us lawyers that use the terms error or abuse of discretion all the time, they're not at all pejorative. They are a term of art. And so if I am making a legal error, I use the wrong instruction to the jury, for example, I abused my discretion in that I argued something that perhaps I wasn't supposed to argue. Those are just terms that are used in the appeal process. So for me, it's like, okay, fine. It doesn't mean that somebody's bad. It doesn't mean they have an agenda. It doesn't mean anything except that that's the term of art that I understand that I'm using in an appeal. But I can recognize that if you're not a lawyer and you don't use those terms all the time, that they don't necessarily make total sense to them as they do to me. So I could see them being tweaked for that, but to me, they're nothing other than a legal terminology that's used all the time in describing the circumstances under which you have an appeal. So that's my first point on that. That's my second point is on the sending things back to Planning Commission or when they get to Planning Commission. As a Planning Commissioner, one of the most frustrating things that I ever had to do was to sit at a meeting when the town council had gone through and checked boxes and crossed T's and dotted I's and said a house is going to be here, it's going to look exactly like this, and then we came back for the architecture and site and we didn't do anything because the council had already done it. So we were going through a hearing where we were saying, well, that's nice, the council said that, but we didn't have the discretion to do anything except maybe change paint color or something. So I don't like sending it back if the council deliberates and says, lower it 5 feet, do this, do that. I'm trying to think of what the example would be, or recently there was actually leeway where it was, please consider, I think it was the one on Shady View, whatever it was. High-low, thank you. Please consider reducing the size of the garage. Please consider blah, blah. So there's actually then a discretionary decision then for the Planning Commission to make. Like, okay, you guys decide what you're going to do, take it back to the Planning Commission, they tell us whether it's okay or not. In that circumstance, I think that makes sense to send it back to the Planning Commission because they're actually performing now their function of being an evaluating and discretionary body. If I just send it back and I've decided the entire thing, then I think it's wasting the Planning Commission's time and the applicant's time because the council's already done it.
We have Commissioner Birch and then Councilmember Leonardis.
So I want to go back to what Vice Mayor Rennie brought up because that application is perfect. The house. So you have a parcel of land which unfortunately was deemed a buildable lot. Can I talk about this?
No, I'd rather use projects that are completely done. That one's still in the process.
It still is?
Yeah.
Okay, so hypothetically, there's a lot somewhere in town. That's a difficult lot, but it was deemed buildable. And we have someone that purchased it and wants to build a home. They bring in an application and technically the height is okay, the FAR is fine, setbacks are okay. However, because of the condition of the actual parcel of property, not necessarily the home, the parcel of property is what's creating this issue, we find ourselves spinning, and that's where we get into this kind of fuzzy gray area of bulk and mass and things. I find it very hard because I might say, well, I'm sorry, you can only have a 500 square foot house. But Commissioner Kane might say, no, it could be 800 square feet. And Commissioner Badami might say something different. So we wind up kind of, I feel bad for applicants in this situation. I don't know how to give them direction. And I'd kind of like to know from some of the council members, what would you like to see us do in those? Because I do feel bad that you wind up seeing it, comes back to us, the poor applicant is dealing with this. How do we help? And I know these are a few and far between, but they are the ones that tie up a lot of time between us and staff. So it would be, if we have one of those, do we have a work session, do a study session together and say, we've got a problem. This has spun around 3 times. What are we going to do? I'd love to hear some of your guys' thoughts on that.
Good. Council member?
With respect to Commissioner Birch's comments, it's very difficult sometimes to try to have a one-size-fits-all type of thing. There's a lot of discretion that goes on, and that's why these boards and commissions exist. So I wish I had a simple answer for that one. But I just keep going back to the process. How do you streamline the process? But how do you streamline it in a way where it's more fair? I was thinking about a recent home project on Hilo, and it's like we only have so much time on the council to get things done. We try to implement our strategic goals every year, and if we get these appeals over and over again and things, they take up a lot of time on our calendar, and we only have so many meetings. So we can't treat every single individual single-family home as a major project like a North 40 or something to that degree. We just don't have the time to do it. So how do we streamline the process? And again, I think that there's got to be a way just to allow only one appeal to council, or if they're coming in with changes, that has to go back to the Planning Commission. And I just wanted to make one other comment on the error and abuse. The whole time I've been on council, which I'm on my 7th year now, it's hard to believe, I'm so young, but every single time I've been up here, I think, I've never heard a council member say, I'm going to remand this back to planning because they erred and abused. That's what they are always accused of, but the deliberation always begins with, I want to start out by saying, I'm thanking the work of the Planning Commission, and I do not believe that they erred or abused. But I am going to send this back with changes, or I am going to approve this, overturn the Planning Commission decision based on new information, or information where the Planning Commission didn't have discretion. Those two options have been used, but the erred and abused has never been used, although it must exist for a reason. And I do respect what Councilmember Jensen said in legal terms.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. So I guess maybe this is a question for others. I'm still trying to grasp this in my head. Planning Commission uses mass and scale and bulk frequently as a reason to deny something. And what I struggle with when it comes to me at council, and they've denied it because it's too big or too tall or something like that, and I go, well, I don't think I agree with them. But because I don't agree, let's say I agree that the scale is okay, is that a reason to grant the appeal? That's what I'm trying to get at. If I just fundamentally don't agree with the decision they arrived at, but obviously there's no new information, they didn't err because part of it is a discretion. There isn't a clear yes or no on everything. There's gray areas, and they make their decision based on that. What if I disagree on that? Is that not a reason to grant an appeal?
Right.
So the way I would interpret this, no, that's not reason. And that's part of the dilemma that we have with those three items is the way we've interpreted the error and abuse of discretion is no, that would not be an error or abuse of discretion. It's just a disagreement. And it's not an error of law or an abuse of discretion. And so then what happens is what I've seen is council struggles very hard because they don't agree with the decision to find that new information to make a change in the project. And so that's part of the dilemma that we're here for, to figure out if we shouldn't be making changes to allow more. What you're saying is you'd like more discretion at the council for that type of situation. At least that's what you're saying.
So if
But then if you do that, then you're right back to the issue of the gaming, because they'll realize that really you have complete discretion to overturn the decision of Planning Commission regardless, just because you disagree with it. So it's a real fine line that we have to walk, but I also want to make certain we are applying it evenly across all projects. That's one of my biggest dilemma right now.
So following on with that, again, I see a fine line between who's really the final decision-making body. Is it Planning Commission or is it council? If we disagree that project was approved or it wasn't approved,
So
and
as I started my comments, 30 years, you have given the Planning Commission much more authority by limiting your appeal rights. In almost all jurisdictions, you absolutely have the right to overturn the Planning Commission because you didn't like their decision. That's almost all jurisdictions do it. But here, we've limited your ability and certainly have given up your discretion to the Planning Commission because of this language.
And I'll just finish with, sort of a comment on that. And I completely understand the Planning Commission's position that they want to be able to make decisions. And I don't want to take that away from them. I want them to make the decisions. But it seems like I also want, in some cases, very infrequently, to change it and not have to go searching for a BS reason to do that. And that's where I'm kind of stuck.
Thank you for that. So we have Councilmember Spector, and then Commissioner Hudes, and then Leonardis.
Thank you. I have my notes here for questions that have been raised. First of all, the question came up about what if we have an ordinance and the ordinance has specific numbers? A house can be no more than X amount of feet high, and it can have no more than this much FAR, has numbers for the FAR. But then it has words like bulk and mass. So when you have words like bulk and mass, what do you do? So I think it's clear that if it's a certain height and a certain FAR, people feel comfortable with that. But what I hear is that they're not so comfortable in dealing with bulk and mass, words like that, and so what do they do? And so what I do, and what I think one does in this kind of situation, is the decision maker has to make the call. There's a word that's called bulk, and it's not defined numerically, and the word that's called mass, and it's not defined numerically. And so the decision maker, be it the planning commission, we'll leave it with the planning commission, those planning commissioners have to make the call. So that's how that is done. It's not a mathematical or engineering task. It's taking all of the evidence and coming to the conclusion as to whether it is too bulky or it has too much mass. And with regard to who makes the decision, in those instances where it would only get to the council because of an appeal, those decisions are made by the Planning Commission. That's where the buck stops. And if it comes up to the council, it would be because of an appeal. And I've heard thoughts about how we might want to change our ordinance on appeal, but that's how it would get to us. And if somebody on the council doesn't like what the Planning Commission has done, then that person or those people have to look at the ordinance on appeal to see if there is a provision in it to allow us to overturn the Planning Commission.
Very good. Thank you for answering the questions that have surfaced. I think that's very helpful. So we have Commissioner Hudes, thank you, and then Leonardis, and then we'll go to Commissioner Janoff. Yes, Hudes.
So a couple of thoughts. I've only been on the commission a little bit over a year, and I read these three criteria very carefully, and they're very much in my mind when I'm deliberating on something, because I think it's really important. And I ask myself, well, what's the role of the Planning Commission? And given the ordinance, it helps to define that role. For instance, if there were the ability to appeal to the council without asking these questions, then why have a planning commission? Why does the town spend the money and recruit people and give their time to considering these things if it's just someone else's opinion? So I feel that doing my job is based on these, and then when it comes to things where there is where there are not objective numbers, that's when I go to the residential design guidelines, which I think are pretty good, that have some techniques to evaluating bulk and scale and mass, and I read this carefully and I think about this carefully, and maybe sometimes this is lacking, in which case I think it's the duty of the Planning Commission to point that out to the council and ask for more guidance with regard to things that are called guidelines. But I think that I think it's important. And then with regard to the first one about error or abuse of discretion, I realize that, the council is reluctant to point that out, but I think it's critically important to have that in the ordinance. If you had a runaway planning commission, there's got to be some way to deal with that, even if we haven't had that situation. So I think it's important to have that language.
Thank you. Council member?
Thank you, Doctor. I just thought of something. You know, a lot of times when I see these appeal forms, they specifically say, I am appealing this to the town council because the planning commission erred and abused in these two categories. So when it comes to the council, it's like staff gives a recommendation, they put the report together, and then we discuss a million other things. And the two things that generally aren't discussed are those things that they actually filed the appeal for. We're usually discussing new information. So I was thinking perhaps the thing to make it fair, if they are filing an appeal based on these two things, only those two things should be discussed. And that might be where the buck stops. And maybe it would make them think more about their appeal or filing an appeal to council. Because again, anybody can file an appeal for any reason. They can accuse the planning commission of error or abuse, and I'm not saying, according to Mr. Hudis's comments, that it doesn't exist, or you wouldn't want to have a culture of a planning commission that would abuse their error and discretion all the time. But if they are appealing based on specifics, the appeal should only be judged on those specifics going forward, and there shouldn't be these other criteria that are taken into consideration. If they appealed and they said, I'm appealing it to council and I'm submitting new information, and this is the new information, then that should be treated like a new application if it is indeed new information.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, thank you. Just thinking about Councilmember Rennie's comments about disagreeing with the decision the Planning Commission might have made regarding bulk and mass. The Planning Commission really is tasked with looking at a certain aesthetic of an applicant's design. And so it is very difficult to get to something sort of, as someone else has said, numerically definable. So there is a certain personal opinion about whether something and that's why it comes to the Planning Commission, because staff has done a great job looking at meeting all the technical guidelines, excuse me, and presumably there's still some reason why it needs to come to the Planning Commission. So my question is, would it be helpful if the Planning Commission, if it's denying an applicant based on bulk mass or some of these sort of non-quantifiable criteria, would it be helpful if we went into more detail about, and this is why, this is what we would recommend, instead of saying I can't really define it, but it's just too big. If we could say, the reason why it's too big is because the front of it is just a solid mass. It needs to be articulated, or better architectural features need to be incorporated. If that's the kind of input that would be helpful to the council, I'm certain that the Planning Commission can provide that detail.
Good. Excellent. Yes, Madam Mayor.
So I want to follow up on Commissioner Janoff's comment and then answer Commissioner Birch's about what is it that would be helpful. And I think at least what I have heard talking with residents is that they're just frustrated. It sounds like we're all frustrated. And if there's a way to make it more efficient so that if there is a denial, there's a clear understanding why, and perhaps I think there's also an idea that once you're denied, there's no way to go back to the Planning Commission, and perhaps maybe if that's just clarified, these are the reasons why, and I don't know if it would be a continuance or what, but I think there's, speaking for myself, and I know all the former mayors here understand, as well as our vice mayor, there are many things that are on our agenda. And what I'm hoping to do is, how do we minimize the amount of appeals so that the deciding body, which is you, look and solve the land use problems and challenges, so that, and if there are certain policy issues that need to be clarified, those are brought up. and then we have that discussion, but let's reduce the number of appeals based on new information and based on just this continuous cycle of, well, I didn't understand what, whether, if it could have been easily mitigated with a decrease in height or a decrease in mass or what. I think that's the bottom line when I think of how, if we can improve the process all at 3 layers, how do we just solve the problem within each layer that we're at, whether you're the planning commission or the council or the staff? And the dilemma I think the planning commissioners have is that when you're at a hearing, you may not have that it's not the most efficient way to arrive at a solution. And so how do we utilize staff so that so much more of this work can be brought up front so that when there is that discretionary discussion, that's what the Planning Commission would be looking at. And then when there is that policy ambiguity, that's what the council would be looking at. And I don't know how to fix the process, so that's ultimately what all of our roles and responsibilities will be.
Mm-hmm. Let's let the town manager jump in, and then we'll go to you, Commissioner Chair.
So one option, because the detail, it would be fabulous, is that when an application is continued at the Planning Commission, that level of detail be articulated at that point, so that way the applicant has very clear direction in terms of what it is you're looking to see when the application returns. And then if the applicant chooses not to be responsive to that, to be comfortable with a denial. Because really that is an option for the Planning Commission and to hold firm to that. And then I would say, we do in the town code, it does talk about new information going back to the Planning Commission for review. And so maybe we just follow that even more carefully because there are communities where a denial is a denial. And if you really want to make a new application, then file a new application and go back through the process. So I think we have the opportunity with the new information item to remand with clarity. And, that could be an option. But I think, even at the continuance stage, the additional detail would definitely be appreciated.
Excellent. So let's go to Commission Chair O'Donnell and then Commissioner Badami.
I think there's a fundamental disagreement, I think, with the role of the Planning Commission. I view the role of the Planning Commission as we have certain discretion under those cases where we have it. We make the discretionary decisions, at which point there has to be something that overturns that decision. It isn't de novo. You don't start all over again. So if you can find that, and the reason, the first thing is if this went up on a writ of mandate, I guarantee to you that the error or abuse is something that the law provides. So there's no use taking it out of there. Secondly, the new information, if your feeling is, and I've heard this from more than one council person, thinking that they're somehow a super planning commission, you can be that, but you have to change your rules. At the moment, it is, if we make a discretionary decision, your ability to overturn that is limited by your own ordinance, not by us, by your own ordinance. But I've seen situations where you just don't like something, and you just don't do it. That's not right. And so I think one of the situations we could solve a lot of the appeals is if you, the council, would apply the rules that you have adopted. If that were to occur, you would cut down on this. On the other hand, I see some advantage. One of the things we're worried about are the economics. And I can think of one project in town where we turned it down flat for 2 reasons. One, for parking, and 2, it didn't fit the zoning. You reversed us, but one of the things that happened was in that meeting, a suggestion was made on how to deal with the parking problem, which was a good suggestion. It was not made to us, it was made to you. Now, you could have said, I don't know what, that's new or something, and sent it back. I was just as glad you didn't do that, because we can carry things on, which is not a good idea. But I am saying if there's a fundamental disagreement as to what your role is, then we're going to continue to have problems that are unnecessary. I, for one, have had no problem with what the council has done. But if there is, and I denote, a basic misunderstanding of the role of the council versus the role of the planning commission, then we're just looking for more trouble. You do not have unlimited discretion to overrule the planning commission. If you're going to overrule us, it has to be on one of those three things. And you don't get to say, I don't like that. If you don't like it, change it. So I would say that some of the discussion here, to me, suggests that the role of the planning commission is not understood. And if that's the case, it's your problem, not mine, because you're going to have more appeals. And apparently you don't think you want to spend all your time on appeals. So that's my view. And the other thing I wanted to say is telling the applicant what to do. You know, some of the property that they come up with, I don't know what they ought to do with it. I know they have a right to use it. We always say we shouldn't design. If I knew what to do with some of those properties, I guess I'd be a millionaire. They've got a piece of property that's very, very difficult, and it is not our job to tell them what to do with it. Because if we did, then when they came before us, we would have, in essence, made a commitment. We can't do that. So I don't agree that the role of the planning commission is to tell the citizen what they ought to do with their property. The citizen ought to tell us what they want to do with their property. They've got all the ordinances, they've got the staff, they've got all that, but it's not our job to put our neck out there so the next time they come up, they can say to us, gee whiz, you already told us we could do that. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, very good. Yes, Commissioner Badami.
That was the exact point I wanted to make, what Commissioner O'Donnell Chair O'Donnell just went off on. In fact, I don't like designing up here either. And often the commission will give the applicant a chance. We'll continue the hearing once to give them an opportunity to listen to some of our suggestions without necessarily designing the house for them. And something that often comes up, again, we've got these applications on steroids. We'll tell them, make it smaller, make it significantly smaller. They'll come back and there'll maybe be a 3% reduction. Is that significant? No, but they're banking their chances. So I'm a little reluctant, actually I'm very reluctant to offer a design to an applicant, especially when an applicant, I believe, is taking his chances anytime he deviates from the residential design guidelines and our general plan. Some of that back and forth is on the applicant.
Very good. Yes, Councilmember Spector, and then Commissioner Kane, and then we'll do a process check.
I totally agree with with Mr. O'Donnell. The commission does its job. That's it. And it has been doing its job, and that's what it should be doing, and it's doing it right. And I also agree with the last two speakers that one does not tell the applicant what to do. You do not tell the applicant, I want this certain house, a certain size, a certain location. We used to call that, and it doesn't come up so much now, designing from the dais, and that we shouldn't design from the dais. So I agree with the last two speakers on both counts.
Very good. Commissioner Kane?
Along those lines, my skin crawls whenever we give a number. You know, well, maybe we get 3 feet. I mean, it doesn't become a guideline, it becomes a target. And a well-intended commissioner trying to find a way out will do that kind of thing, and by God, that's the number we get the next time we see them, and it becomes something of a covenant. Now, no, I don't. What we have said, if council approves, in terms of our guidance, is we have outstanding language. We really do. Residential, hillside, commercial, it's really here. So read the standards and guidelines, read the ordinances, listen to staff when it goes back for revision or something, and listen to your neighbors. And there's no 6 feet, 10 feet, anything in there. Those are 3 really good points. The problem is we're trying to quasi-adjudicate perfectly good language, but the motivation is cha-ching. And so we can get at odds with that, and if we had clarity from council on this appeal process, and clarity that we're going to use our language and the neighbors and staff, then the applicant has one way to go. and that's do the right thing and worry less about the extra $2,000 or whatever it is. But I understand their motivation, but we've got to be consistent.
Okay, council member?
Another random thought here. So a lot of times when someone's bringing their project to a public hearing, they've never been through the process before, or they don't know what to expect, or they don't know who's going to come out from the public and speak and influence the decision of the hearing body. And because of that, a lot of times someone will bring their house project and there won't be anybody show up. There'll be a couple people show up to support. And if it's, the commission might put it through if it looks everything's fine, but for whatever reason it was recommended by staff to go through. It goes through quite easily. On other occasions there'll be many neighbors raising opposition, and then all of a sudden the applicant is faced with they're stuck in this situation, and perhaps the public has influenced the commission with their comments to decide against that individual or that application. And that's kind of another reason why it would be great to, as Ms. Bravetti mentioned, have a continuance and then maybe go back with the applicant and say, hey, this is the concerns the public's raising. Will you take some of these into consideration? Or have it get appealed back to the Planning Commission, because then they know what to expect on the second time around, and they can listen to the public's feedback should they desire to do that before they appeal it to council, as opposed to, I'm going to ignore the public and all my neighbors, and I'm going to appeal it to council. I'm going to change a few things and try to persuade council to accept a new project based on new information.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll go to Vice Mayor, and then we'll stop and take a break and reassess. Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
So I want to go back and just reiterate, I still think it's the Planning Commission's job to help applicants get to a solution that's acceptable. I didn't say that meant you had to tell them exactly how many feet or exactly how to design it, but I got to re-say this because I just heard three people sort of go extreme and say it's not our job to design from the dais, it's not our job to give them numbers. Well, I don't think you have to design it or give them numbers in order to help move them. I've seen the Planning Commission do it many times where they made it clear this modern design just doesn't fit. Okay. So they came back with a design that did fit. So the Planning Commission has done it many times. I just want to, I just heard 3 or 4 people say, no, it's not our job, by sort of using extreme examples. I know that's not really what they wanted to say, but I just wanted to reiterate.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. So are we ready for a break,
I think
Madam
so.
Mayor?
We've gotten a request for a break, and then we'll move to the I think we've had good discussion.
Good.
And so staff, based on the feedback that we've gotten, we'll talk further on what, if necessary. I mean, a lot of it could just be how we move forward with the existing language. Okay? But if we could take a 5-minute break, that would be helpful.
Yes, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene at 8:35.
Okay.
the town manager just to do a summary primarily around potential improvements. And we'll just do the quick summary, then we'll move on to our next topic.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we were hearing was really consensus around our existing ordinance and really implementing the ordinance as it stands, and that there were some ideas about some potential changes, but really, you know, all of us kind of working to making sure that if we get new information, which was reasonably available, that we do return applications to the commission. So I think we're going to, you know, keep going forward with what we have, and then see if that will help our applicants have more certainty. There were a lot of great ideas. I think the discussion was fabulous, and so I think we've got, there's no real specific need to change anything at this point, but there are some great ideas if we do find we need to.
Yeah, please.
And I just want to augment onto that with all of these land use applications, staff has the most interaction with our applicants. And similar to what Council Member Leonardo said, how do we get things done at the lowest possible level? And so we would look to Mr. Paulson in your department to just clearly articulate that we've had this discussion and this is our intent, so that there's a clear understanding of how the appeal process is being looked at.
Very good. Okay, so we are now ready to move into the next topic, which is residential design guidelines. And the focus here on residential design guidelines will be on page 11 from the guidelines on the 225 diagram. So I want to check in with council first on this. And my question to council is, staff interprets 225 to be, I'm going to make sure I get this right, to be a test, not the test, a test, more of a guideline than a rule. Okay, so that's how staff is interpreting 225. So let me check in with council. Is that how you interpret 225? Councilmember Jensen.
I'm sorry, this is my thing, so I'm just going to start right in. I think it's unfortunate that the thing that we got attached to our agenda tonight is page 11. This is the residential design guidelines. It's my favorite show and tell. It's 87 pages long, including the glossary. It has all kinds of helpful diagrams, as Mr. Hudis was saying, Commissioner Hudis. And it requires one to read it, it requires one to be familiar with it, and then it requires one to evaluate the application versus what's in the 87 pages of the guidelines. There are diagrams. One of them is on page 11. Page 11 diagram. I didn't even know until 6 months ago that anyone called it, quote, 225, unquote. I just think of the residential design guidelines. And if we were to interpret it as the test, I very much respect our planning commission. We recruit the best people. They are incredibly conscientious. They work really hard. They do their evaluation, and we value their discretion. If we were to interpret page 11 as the test, we would not need them. We would need Google Maps, pictures of the places on the diagram. We do an algorithm, and we would be done. So what we require our advisory bodies to do is advise us based upon the best use of their discretion, given the guidelines and the policies that we have. And we've got a good document, so I encourage the Planning Commission to use that entire document and then exercise their discretion and come up with a decision. If we were to take that algorithm, potentially we would have, and some people would think this is a good thing, but potentially we would have pockets that would never change. Because if you have something that's out of use or hasn't been maintained, and that is the standard baseline, then there's no moving from that if you didn't exercise discretion. So I actually feel pretty passionately about this. It's a guideline, and I value the discretion of the Planning Commission and hope that they use it.
Very good. Other council members, you can just jump in. Councilmember Spector.
All right. I think, well, it's not I think. This is, for me, is not just a guideline. and I would not interpret it the way you've said that staff is interpreting it. It is on page 11, that's true, and the whole document has many more pages than page 11, that's true. But the 225 is not only on page 11 as a diagram, it's also referenced, the immediate neighborhood is also referenced as a principle, a design principle. It's also referenced with the word shall on page 11 and on page 13. Residential development shall be similar in mass, bulk, and scale to the immediate neighborhood. So throughout this document, the diagram on page 11 is duplicated. It is referenced as a principle. It is referenced with the verb shall. And then when you go to the appendix, every design element that we are asked to examine is examined by virtue of the immediate neighborhood parcels on every single page. What I was trying to think of as I prepared for this evening is, in what instance would you not use the immediate neighborhood, the design principles, the shall mandates? And I couldn't think of one, but there's part of me that thinks that somewhere we would not be looking at the 225, but I just couldn't think of an example.
Thank you. I'm going to go to council members first and just hear from the rest of the council members, and then we'll open that up. Council member?
I agree with the comments that were previously stated already.
From?
They're
Councilmember
different.
Jensen and Councilmember Spector.
Okay.
On the 225.
Okay. I heard different things from Councilmember Jensen and Councilmember Spector.
I agree with both different opinions.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Sure, I'll make some comments. So I think I'm a little more aligned with Councilmember Jensen. It does keep talking about immediate neighborhood, but I'm not convinced that immediate neighborhood equals the 225, because that's a little too immediate. They even talk about, people living nearby having to see the house, people that live somewhat nearby driving by and having to see the house. So to me, the immediate neighborhood isn't just the 225. It's broader than that. I mean, if I'm 3 houses down across the street, I can still see the house, but I don't fall in the 225 anymore. So what this really means, what it's saying is you want the house to blend with the other houses near it somehow. But there's other things in here, though, that talk about, neighborhoods that are beyond the 225 is part of the neighborhood. It talks about transitional neighborhoods and so forth. So I think I'm more on the Councilmember Jensen side of things.
Thank you. Yes, Madam Mayor.
I think the difference that you're hearing in interpretation is that there are factors that are unique with applications. And thinking through various examples, I know on Shannon Road there was one lot that was subdivided into 2 homes. And when you use the 225, how do you use that when you have a church across the street, and then you have homes that were in the county that were significantly small? So there are pockets where it's difficult to look at an immediate characterization of your neighborhood. There are oftentimes, another example we had was on El Gato, where you have homes that were, I think, 900 square feet in size, and you may look at that as your immediate neighborhood, but then you also bring in some discussion of, does it make sense to increase size to accommodate current trends in housing? So it's a test, it is a helpful guideline, but there are so many other areas and factors to look at. And so it's difficult for me to say it's the test when there are so many unusual factors that go into each home, which is oftentimes why we spend so much time on these home applications. And our neighborhoods are unique, and so I think we need to follow those neighborhoods and see what various factors are the most inherent ones in those applications. So.
Okay. Councilmember Jensen, and then we'll open it up.
Okay, I just wanted to read something in light of some of the statements from page 11, and it's right before the chart. It says, the diagram below illustrates the town's interpretation of the immediate neighborhood in standard subdivisions. There are several factors in determining an immediate neighborhood when this diagram may not be applicable. These factors include, but are not limited to, location and visibility of the building, e.g. terrain of the lots with multiple frontages, and diversity of parcel size. So may not be applicable is not the same as shall be applicable. It's the opposite. So that's why you read the entire guidelines and make a discretionary decision.
Madam Mayor, is there's some difference opinion on council. Is this something that would be a potential future council agenda item? And if you're not ready to answer, that's okay.
I think we should, based on what we're hearing, my understanding, and I'm going to look to Mr. Schultz, is that if we deviate from our policies, that's when we put this on the future. He didn't want to answer. But legally,
So many. So many times you can have different legal interpretations, but I cannot even try to make a recommendation that this is the test. I think Councilmember Jensen, when I read this language, and I wasn't there when it was written, it specifically says, her language, what she said, it may not be applicable, means it's not the test that you have to apply every single time. The paragraph before it, common sense should, not shall, should be used when applying this diagram. I think it's so very clear that it's not the test and that you do have the discretion. It definitely is a substantial test. It's something that every single time you should be looking at it, but it's not the wherewithal. And if in fact council wants to change that and say it will be used on every single project, then staff does need to come back with amendments. So, I mean, we can talk about all the other standards that are shall, but the actual diagram, I think it's very clear that the language said it's not the test, and it has to be used on every single project.
Okay. I'm going to go to Councilmember Leonardis, and then we're going to open it up to the commissioners, please.
Further comments, you know, a lot of times you're faced with the reality of the highest and best use. Somebody buys a 1,000 square foot home on a 10,000 square foot lot, and their expectation is they can build a house that has the maximum floor area ratio, the maximum height, according to those guidelines, and they don't even consider this 225 rule. They don't even know it exists. They don't go into our design guidelines. They just come to us with an application. So I don't know how to answer that. You know, we live in Silicon Valley, and a lot of these homes were built for GIs after World War II, and they were built 1,000 square feet, 3-bedroom, 1 bath, or whatever, and they have a flat roof. And people don't live that way anymore. So what do you do? Is this kind of thing, I mean, I know there's shalls and all these things, and it can be interpreted in these kinds of things, but there's also the economic pressures, and that's kind of the new reality.
Okay. Very good. So I have Commissioner Kane and then Commissioner Birch, and yes, okay. Commissioner Kane.
Well, I was there when these were written. I think my name's on the front of the document, along with Chair O'Donnell. Councilwoman Jensen may have been with us at the time, maybe Councilperson Spector, but my memory fades, but I remember well the day that we walked the streets of Los Gatos with the town architect, Larry Cannon, and came up with 225 then and there. It would be a mistake, it would be an error, it would be unfair to say that it is the test. It is a test. I regard it as a significant test, but as Commissioner O'Donnell will attest, we've used discretion a number of times where clearly common sense indicated that we do something a little bit different. We're not giving up our language, but that is a concern for me, is giving up a tool because it becomes more and more vague as the pressures build to build bigger and more expensive homes. I read the bullets on page 11, and I want to stand up and cheer, because my job, as I see it, and I can be corrected, is to serve the town with an eye toward preservation of its character, of its look and feel. And there are 87 pages to the document. I've read them all. I helped write them. This is a terribly important page because of the tools it has for me to do my job of appropriate preservation. And 225 is not an absolute test. Again, that'd be foolish. But it does come in handy. And it's not just, the words are not just here for the words. The words are here for the people who live in those other houses and their quality of life, and how they feel about something new and different, out of place, being erected, as has happened. During my first term, we built a couple of elephants, and why do we do that? Because they don't look like anything else. So we may also have a tempest in a teapot, in that I'm not sure we've ever abused it. I'm not sure that it's ever become an argument between the two bodies or even among the one body. We've got a good tool, and I believe we make good, prudent use of it, but we do not abuse it or overuse it or have it become a foolish consistency, which is a hobgoblin of little commissioners and other divinities. We don't do that. And O'Donnell will be the first one to tell you that discretion is a better part of his valor. So I don't think we have a problem. I think we have an argument on words, but in practice and application, I don't think we've had a problem with it, where we've overused it or abused it. But it's a tool that'll be very hard to live without.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Birch.
So I just want to say thank you that we're having this discussion, because I'm going to give an example, but I'm not going to actually discuss the property because I believe they're going to come back. At a recent Planning Commission meeting, we actually had this exact issue come up with two applicants, one right after the other. The first had a proposal for a home that had apartments, some other things around it, and in their application, they gave us a broader neighborhood scope. I want to say it was almost 4 blocks. Yep. And we considered this. There was a discussion, we asked staff about it, we had a very good conversation. However, the very next applicant came up, and across from them is a hill, and they were trying to have the same conversation. However, they kind of got shut down on that. And I left that meeting particularly very frustrated and not really understanding how I'm supposed to interpret this 225. So I'm very thankful for this discussion, because I've always seen it as every application is independent, and I need to take a broader look. As you said, if we have 5 houses that are all 900 square feet, is that practical? We might have to look a little bit further and make sure that we're making sure that we have a livable town. So I agree with what we're saying here, and I thank you, because it's going to help me with some decisions that may come to you guys in understanding how we're going to interpret this.
Very good. Yes, Commissioner Hudis.
So I think I was actually in the minority on a couple of Planning Commission decisions that were subsequently appealed and then overturned on this. So I am glad we're having this discussion, because my reaction to the Planning Commission deliberations was that I was being told by other commissioners that this was a hard and fast rule we must follow. And then I started just to try to read the language. And when I read the language, I see some things that say this is the interpretation of the immediate neighborhood in standard subdivisions. And thank goodness we have a lot of things that are not standard subdivisions in Los Gatos, that are not laid out neatly on a grid, and that are on curves and have adjacent properties that are very interesting. And so I think that in those cases, it's important to kind of go beyond that one section and look at the broader document. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation about it for that reason. And I think also the term neighborhood, again, I looked for that. There's a definition of immediate neighborhood, but then there's other ways that the word neighborhood is used. There's the surrounding neighborhood, then there's just the word neighborhood. And I have to read that and say, okay, well, when they're talking about just neighborhood, that seems like that's a broader definition than immediate neighborhood. And so there's some things that apply there. And maybe there was intent to do this in a certain way when it was drafted, but I wasn't there, I don't know. And so I'm just trying to read and absorb the document and the use of the word neighborhood. Why was it in some cases specified as immediate neighborhood, and then in other cases, the word immediate wasn't next to the word neighborhood? Okay, so.
Excellent. So am I hearing, and we have not heard from everybody, but am I hearing here that there seems to be some consensus around the table here that it is a guideline, an important guideline, a significant guideline, but a guideline? I'm seeing nods around the table here. Yes, Commissioner Chair O'Donnell.
I think I do agree that it shouldn't be an ironclad rule, but the problem is that we could improve the drafting, because the argument in part stems from the language that everybody has referenced. The diagram below illustrates the town's interpretation of immediate neighborhood in standard subdivisions. There are several factors, et cetera, but it says, to me, that is the rule in that instance when you have this classic neighborhood. We have found that many times there is no classic neighborhood, in which case I don't think we feel bound by shall. You could probably make this clearer by going on a little further than we presently do, because a lot of people who are very smart people focused on shall, and for a while I think that was it. That was the end of the discussion. But I will tell you, as a planning commissioner, when people come in and say, there's some houses 4 blocks away that look like this one, that it becomes difficult for us, because I don't think that's the neighborhood. But so I think sometimes the idea of shall being the immediate neighborhood as the 225 should be softened or should be clarified, because when it says in standard subdivisions, you know, I know what I think is a standard subdivision, and I agree with whoever said we don't have many standard subdivisions. But when I was young, I lived in San Jose. They had a lot of standard subdivisions. We don't. So we could improve this to make it a little bit easier. I think the discussion is good. I think those of us leaving this discussion, if we had any doubt before, probably don't have any doubt now. I just suggest we soften that language or expand
Good.
it.
And to the extent that we start moving here towards how we can tighten this up or make an improvement, that would be wonderful. Yes, Commissioner Hanson.
I think the residential design guidelines are great, and I think that, there's been many times where the commission's had to look at 225 and it doesn't apply, and we've had to look at other neighborhoods. The area I think that we are going to run into again is we don't really have a way to deal with. We have pockets of county properties in Los Gatos in many places, and we recently had an application in this area, and the county has they don't have the FAR guidelines, they don't have neighborhood design guidelines, they don't do any of this stuff. So they have no problem with taking a 5,000 square foot lot and putting a 4,000 square foot house on it. So, and then that ends up being in the neighborhood. You could have a county house here and then a Los Gatos house here and a county house here. So then, then it makes it very difficult to interpret the neighborhood, and it makes it very difficult to help the applicants understand, that this isn't the way the Los Gatos neighborhood is, but the fact is that their street is changing because of the county. So I just wondered if there's some, I don't know that this is a discretion thing, but I mean, that seems to be an area that we're going to run into again and again, and I'm not sure of the best way to handle it.
Yeah, and staff, Rob or Joel, anything about county parcels or any guidance?
So I think you still have discretion. From staff's perspective, they're part of the neighborhood. So you have to look at that from a context perspective. But the Planning Commission and Council have the discretion to take that and weigh that evidence, and maybe there is some factor there that you consider, but ultimately from staff's perspective, it's part of the neighborhood. So especially if it's in the immediate neighborhood.
Thank you. Madam Mayor?
I was going to say, see, that type of feedback is very helpful, because as we work with the staff, I mean, these are policy interpretations that perhaps we can talk further about in policy committee and council so that we can provide clearer guidance so that that ambiguity is removed.
Vice Mayor Rennie?
So I'll just add my thinking on it, and maybe we need to add policy language to make it clearer. But if the house next door is in the county, that's certainly the immediate neighborhood, and it's definitely something. I mean, when we're talking about neighborhood, we're talking about visual. It needs to visually fit in. Well, do we just pretend that house is not there because it's in the county? That's ridiculous. But on the other hand, it doesn't give you an excuse to break the rules, right? A lot of, there's rules that we follow. Occasionally we let them actually break the rules, but then there's a lot of discretion, the bulk mass and so forth. Should it be two-story or not two-story, or should it be a smushed down two-story? Those kind of discretions seems like it should be affected visually by what's around it. But if it's a ridiculous far house, that doesn't mean now you can go build a ridiculous far house in the town. It just has some influence on the discretionary portion of it.
Very good. Okay, other comments on 225 on design guidelines? I think we're ready to move on. That was very good. Excellent. Very good. So that concludes the three main topics: roles and responsibilities, the appeal process, and design guidelines. Yeah. And so we're ready to move to the economic presentation.
Right. And with this one, we had discussed putting this on the agenda just because we wanted to give you the larger context of the economic challenges and issues that we're grappling with as a council, and give some larger context to some of the business applications you may be seeing. I know, having seen a couple of appeals, there were some conversations of what did they want, and so I hope tonight it gives you that answer of what's the larger context that we are grappling with as a council.
Great, thank you. Good evening. I'm Monica Wren. Shannon's passing out a copy of the presentation just because there are some charts that are a little bit small so you can follow along in front of you. So tonight I just want to start kind of in a broad, big, global perspective to put some context on what the economics are here in the Silicon Valley, and then even more specific here in Los Gatos. So we'll start kind of high level on a global economy perspective. And what you see here is globally, the economy has been pretty soft through 2016. And that's for a couple different reasons. There's been some restructuring in other countries, there's been reoccurring disasters, and then of course the geopolitical events have caused somewhat of a softening with the kind of global economy. As we move more local to the United States, you can see here that we really are doing much better. There were an average of 284,000 jobs per month were added in the fourth quarter of last year. So this is pretty important because we're going to, thank you. Better. We're going to touch on what our unemployment and our employment is here locally in the next slide. So what they've kind of seen from the United States is that we are seeing more jobs created. We're also starting to see that indebted households are reaching a higher rate. They're reaching closer rates to what we were right before the Great Recession that hit. And then the total debt, including mortgage, is also rising. It's up to close to $133,000 per household. And so these are pretty similar to the 2008 rates. And then the household income is not rising at the same rate as the cost of living is. So what we've seen is that incomes are going up about 25%, but the cost of living is really shooting up at a much higher rate than that. And we're seeing that nationally. So moving even a little bit smaller now to California. California is really moving when it comes to the jobs. We've had over 300,000 were added in 2016. Our unemployment rate is 5.2. And you can see at one point in 2010, it was up above 12%. So we're really performing at much stronger than a lot of the other nation, but the rest of the nation. But we are doing a really good job here in California. But then you come almost to this bubble that a lot of people talk about, and that's Silicon Valley. So we have an extremely strong economy here. We lead the nation in growth, income, innovation, and VC investments. We had the most mergers in 2016, and the cost of talent here is at an all-time high. It's never cost companies so much to recruit and to bring people here. We continue to be the technology hub for the nation. Our median house price is $961,000, and that actually compares. The rest of the country is at about $230,000 for a median cost of a home, and then you can see there the sales price is actually higher, closer to $1.2 million. The average household income. We do have the highest in the nation at $93,000. However, if you were to look at the cost of living at a $1.2 million home and a $93,000 income, those further kind of show that that the cost of living and the cost of wages are not matching up. And then finally, we did see some job cuts last year in this area. They were mostly 1 in 5 are in the energy sector, but overall, we actually added 21% of the total jobs added in California were here in Santa Clara County. So this county, this area is really thriving. And so what does that mean for Los Gatos? How does that kind of come down to our town? And we'll get to that in just 1 second. I wanted to give you an overview of what we're seeing from who wants to move in, what's building, what are people looking for. So office is actually the hottest commodity right now. We have about 8.1 million square feet of office in Silicon Valley, and you can see 6 million of that is leased by 2 companies. So the remaining 2 million, the remaining companies in Silicon Valley are constantly looking for. They're bidding each other up to lease these spaces. When something becomes available, it's immediately leased. And then almost all new construction is actually pre-leased. So when an office building is approved, almost immediately it's leased to a company before that's even broken ground. So the next thing is kind of this thought of not just office, but an R&D flex space. So this is what the new Apple campus is actually defined as an R&D flex space, because they do have office components, but they're really about the research, the development, and kind of what goes on for that whole company in one location. So down here you can see there's some statistics for what we have here in Los Gatos as far as the square footage for office and R&D. And at the end of 2016, we only had about 4% of our 81,000 square feet available. So even though we have much smaller floor plates, there are still office looking to be here. Anecdotally, when we go out and meet with companies, a lot of them will say, I did my startup here because my home is here. And it's hard to recruit staff because the cost of living is so high, but once I get my staff here, they love it. They love that they can walk downtown, they love that they can eat lunch here. So we do still see this as an appealing place for office space, especially if it's within a walkable distance of somewhere to get food and some amenities. So one of the challenges that we have in Los Gatos is that we really don't have that flex space that most of Silicon Valley is looking for right now. We do have our LM zone, which is R&D, but we have a very limited restriction on what we can do to be flexible with that. So looking more now at retail, and probably specific to downtown, I think we oftentimes think about downtown as our kind of first retail hub. We have really seen the boulevard come up in the last couple years with the addition of housing, with the addition of people being more willing to ride a bike, to walk. We do see that there are a lot of people kind of walking, shopping in that Blossom Hill and Los Gatos Boulevard area. It's almost like a secondary zone, but we do oftentimes think about downtown as our primary shopping district. So retail's holding pretty steady nationwide. A lot of the retail is really depending on shopper behavior. So the millennials, of course, there's a lot of talk about millennials and kind of what they bring to the table. This would be the 18 to 35 range for age. So 54% of them make their purchases online. That's up from 48% last year and 47% the year before. So we're starting to see that kind of climb. And then that excludes groceries. So this is goods outside of groceries. And then what I thought was even more interesting when I was doing some of this research is that across all demographics, millennial, Generation X, baby boomers, 41% of people showroom. They go to a store, they look at the product, they try it on, they figure out what they want, and then most of them before they left the store have already Googled it, found it somewhere else cheaper, found it online cheaper. So that then causes a little bit of that, yeah, we have people downtown, but are they shopping? Or they're coming into my store, they're trying this on, but they're never coming back to purchase it. So we're seeing that becoming more common. And because of things like that, it starts to push the need to become smaller floor plates that, also the wave of the future is self-checkout, that you'll be checking out and not needing that area for a store any longer. A lot of studies have shown, and I know that this would probably be contested in Los Gatos because parking tends to be a hot topic, is that the need for surface parking is actually declining with self-driving cars, with ride sharing. The expectation is that need will start to decline in this area given the technology that we have. So the other kind of struggle is that retailers, it's costing them more to operate their business. Buildings are selling for more, so the rent is higher. The pass-through for insurance, the pass-through for property taxes, all of that becomes part of what the leasee needs to pay. And then if they're making less based on what's being purchased in their store, then we start to see that struggle. So what the research is showing is that we've probably hit a plateau for what rent is going to cost. It's probably going to stay right about where it is right now for the next year or two. Silicon Valley-wide, the average is around $275 to $450 a square foot, and that includes Class A. We see something a little bit higher here. I don't have an exact number, but I know just from recent kind of calling and fact checking, we do have some places that are as much as $5 and $6 a square foot, but we do have a couple places that are down in that $2 to $3 range. So I think a lot of that is really going to be the building owners and the retailers kind of coming to an understanding of what's doable. So when we look for, excuse me one second. So when I look for trends, or we look for trends in Los Gatos, there's a couple different ways to gather the information. So one is just the business inquiries. Who's calling me or calling us or calling planning on a daily basis and saying, this is what I want to do. Property owner feedback, oftentimes I'll go out and meet with a property owner who has a vacancy, and they'll tell me who's called them, or they'll send people my way, or we'll have that kind of exchange of conversation. So I do gather information from them. There's always the broker and the industry feedback. Sometimes it's trends. Sometimes I'll have a broker call and say, I have these 3 businesses looking to be in Los Gatos. What do you have that fits them? So without becoming involved in that private partnership between a landlord and a building owner, we do try to kind of help people match make for what their use is, for what their investment, what they want their investment to be in the town. Lots of times I'll just go walk around. I'll go walk a shopping center, walk downtown, talk to people, talk to the owners, figure out what's going on. Sometimes we hear rumors, and I'll just kind of go out and just chat with the building owners or the retailers to figure out, where they are, what they need. And then finally, we have our sales tax report. So sales tax oftentimes gives us a little bit of a peek into what shopping behavior is. I know sometimes it can be confusing. It's hard to pull out which business is which because it's confidential, but it does really help us understand what the shopping behaviors are in town. So this chart right here shows a little bit of the capture and the gap analysis. So if you're seeing something that's less than 100%, then we have leakage there, meaning that whatever percentage is missing, that part of our population expected expenditures are going to another town or city. The capture is where we're over 100%, so that means we're actually getting more than what's expected to be spent here. Maybe that's somebody coming from Camel to shop here, or maybe that's people here spending more dollars. So from this, you can see that we're kind of trending on course with what other people are seeing. We're seeing the food markets, the food processing really on the rise. That's one thing, short of grocery delivery, that you can't do online. You can't eat. You can't drink, or not yet at least. So those are things that people have to leave their house for. As far as the furniture and appliance is pretty high. So we do have we have electronic store that sells phones, things like that. Those fall in that furniture and appliance. So that is why we see it up that high. And then the top would be the building materials and the wholesale. So these are kind of finite breakdown of what the expenditures are. If we move to the next slide, you'll see how we compare with the other cities in the county here. So everybody, so not everybody is seeing a decline like we're seeing, but it's pretty typical, with the exception of a couple cities, that the general retail is dropping. The food products are on a rise everywhere. So those two things do help us understand shopping behavior. They help us understand where and how people are spending their money. Transportation will always fluctuate. Transportation includes gas prices, so we'll oftentimes see that ebb and flow based on what the oil prices are. Sometimes, so for example, we see a really big drop here because this is just one quarter. It's comparing 2015 over 2016 of the third quarter. So sometimes, like in this one, we see a big drop in like our biz to biz. That could be that we had a contractor come in and set up office equipment for a new office building. So they might have done that in one quarter, and they don't come back obviously the next quarter because it's a one-time job. So those are things we also try to monitor when we're looking at sales taxes. What is really a trend, and what is really kind of a one-time expenditure that's either spiking us or putting us in a deficit. So then that kind of leads to the process that I become involved in. And I just want to start by saying, you know, a lot of cities don't have the working relationship that planning department and economic vitality have in Los Gatos. We're very fortunate for that. We work very closely. We are always we're always sharing information. So if someone calls planning and there's really a more appropriate start to be with me, then we'll do that. If it starts with me and I think, you know what, this is a really technical, you know, this is an A&S question or something that's outside of my purview, then we would connect them with planning. And it's been something that's been pretty successful. I think it's really important as these businesses come in, kind of the first conversation is, you know, thank you for choosing Los Gatos. Why do you want to be here? What is it? What does your customer look like? Does it look like a customer that's downtown, that's walking to your business? Does it look like a customer who's stopping on their way home from work? So these are all kind of background questions that help me familiarize myself with somebody's concept, and also kind of helps them understand how we look at business in Los Gatos. We definitely tend to see those walkable foot traffic type businesses locate downtown, and we really strive to keep that kind of charming mix down there. So we will never tell somebody you need to be in this zone, but we would help them understand what the other businesses are in that zone, and then they can conclude if that's the type of synergy they want for their business. So typically we'll set up a pre-meeting if somebody calls. It's usually by phone. They're always welcome to come in. We talk a little bit about the location. The location always makes a big difference. So when someone comes in, that's pretty much where we start. It depends on if they need a use permit sometimes. It depends on, you know, if there's going to be traffic impact fees. There's a lot of things that play into an application. So we really want to understand where somebody wants to be. And then should they decide, okay, yes, we found a lease, we're ready to go, we want to do a CUP, I'll usually sit down with them and a member from planning, sometimes someone from engineering or building, depending on the project, and we'll walk through the whole CUP process with them. We'll help them understand what they need. We'll help them understand maybe what other businesses have gone through who are similar and going into a similar place. But we do have the motto, we are open for business. So we're always trying to help somebody bridge that gap, make the connection to open their business here. What I have found is that it's really the process that oftentimes becomes a deciding or limiting factor for people. The cost of the process, the length of the process, or just the idea that they've heard this process is tremendous. So as far as the rumors and that we've heard it's tremendous goes, we try to combat that with great customer service and really helping them lay out a path. As far as the time and the money and the materials, that's a decision that they ultimately have to make. And if there's ways to streamline that, we hear that all the time. Can we streamline this process? Staff's always open to have that conversation or to look at ideas with both the Planning Commission and the Council. So I think we don't have very many vacancies in downtown. I do know of a couple that are coming. We do have some building owners who know their business is maybe delinquent, but they would rather have somebody in there than have a vacant storefront. So sometimes there's that's going on as well. We don't necessarily see the vacancies, but we know kind of in the background that the health of some of the businesses aren't as strong as they could be. The thing I probably hear the absolute most, I hear it from developers, I hear it from businesses, is, okay, fine, what does Los Gatos want? I have 3 concepts, or I'm a broker with 3 businesses that all want into Los Gatos. What do you want? And that's a difficult question to answer, obviously. One is we want a mix. We want a diverse, charming town. We want services, but we don't have a set ratio of what we want, restaurant versus formula versus shoe stores. That's not something we do. So this often leaves people a little bit frustrated because they want to come in and hear, oh yeah, we want 2 new short shops and we want 7 new handbag shops, but we don't have that. So this is often a conversation that we'll have, and then they'll go away and then they'll come back with, okay, I have this, how can we do it? I think if there's ever a time that you want to articulate or come up with ideas, that's certainly something staff as well would be happy to look at, but of course, it's going to change. It's so dynamic. It depends really on the marketplace and what's out there. So in the bottom there, you see some of the circles in green. These are the most popular, I would say, at this time. This is really what the market is driving. They're driving, obviously, the food and beverage because that's where the shoppers are going, and ultimately people open businesses as a livelihood to make money. So that we tend to see the food and beverage on a rise. We're seeing more building owners considering formula as a way to anchor a tenant to shop. So we know that in the depth of the recession, it was a lot of those formula retailers that kept people coming into town and then discovering, oh my gosh, there's a new store, there's a new restaurant, there's a new place to be. So we've had a lot of conversations with people, trying to find a formula retail that's not necessarily well known, but one that they think serves our population. So I do anticipate that we will see more applications, or at least have more questions about formula coming forward in the future. A lot of the things include a service-based retail or a class. And this is, again, something I think Councilmember Jensen always will say, and it really makes a lot of sense, something to show up for. And this is what people are trying to do. They are trying to create ideas to get people in their location. And so is it a service? Maybe they do sell dresses, but they tailor them a special way, or they want to be able to offer a quick hairdo while you're in there, so you buy a dress off the rack and you wear it out, and you feel like you've had this makeover there. So those are kind of the things that we hear people saying. Next would be the makers movement. So things like small batch whiskey, things like little like trinkets, or something where it's start to finish in one place. It's made there, it's developed there. People can come in and try whatever it is. We've had a lot of virtual reality people call and say, and then we're stuck with, what is this? Is this an entertainment? Is this an office use? Is it an experience? They're selling this experience, but how do we kind of frame that? So that's something that the staff's also looking at. And then obviously the mobile, the pop-up, the food trucks, that's a huge movement now in Silicon Valley. Lots of things, not just food, but there's services that come on trucks. There's vintage clothing that comes on trucks and pop-ups. There's also people who they want to rent a vacancy for 6 months and test a market. So we don't necessarily have a process that lends itself to that. And if this is the way that kind of some of the marketplace is going, do we want to create that opportunity? It's not realistic to think that someone will come through a CUP process for a 6-month pop-up when it takes equally as much time to get through the process in some cases. So then, of course, we have the hybrid business model, which mixes some of this together, and then experiential retail. That's very similar to that service-based retail. It's creating an experience. It's not about sitting behind your computer or your phone and buying what you want. It's about finding that experience and meeting your friends there. A lot of people look for ways that bring multiple people together because you'll tend to stay longer, you'll tend to shop more, and then you'll tend to be encouraged by your friends to purchase items. So that's what I have for you. I'd like to open it up for questions if you have any questions on this information, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Spano.
So, thank you very much. This is really, really helpful. Because honestly, we see so many different things come in front of us. I think sometimes we wonder what Los Gatos wants, right? And this is focused quite a bit on the retail downtown factor. But what I would like to know is, how are you guys looking at office? There definitely is a trend of this R&D. We're building offices that incorporate small R&D labs, environmental chambers for testing. They don't want to be driving to Fremont anymore to do that. That's happening in-house. And it's a big movement. And how are we looking to address, a lot of economy experts are calling for a recession around 2019. Not as big as last time, but we're looking at something. And we're already starting to see slowdown in space being leased and people driving the cost down a little bit. So how are we looking at the businesses that we have in town, what their longevity is, and how we're bringing in companies that are going to sign 7 to 12-year leases instead of the 3-year leases? How are we bringing them in and anchoring them in town?
So addressing that last question, how do we bring people in? It has been our practice for several years is that we just don't recruit businesses that require use permits specifically, because there's always that uncomfortable of, hey, please come, we want you to be right here, and then they're not able to get approved, or they're not able to get approved for what they want. Maybe they come through with something that's not fitting of that zone. So as a rule, we don't necessarily recruit. Our efforts are put into retention. Now, when there is a space available, we will help the owner identify, types of tenants, I can say. The policy committee has been working really hard on looking at policies around makers, about looking at policies around providing some flex so that we can accommodate some of those needs. And I think the LM zone is a really interesting one in particular because it runs along University. So it really has that it can have that vibe of being this industrial area, but it's walkable to downtown. So it is extremely appealing for companies who want to come and do a lot of things in one place. Because the cost of operating a business and the cost of rent is pretty high, people don't want 3 or 4 places. They don't want to drive from place to place. They want to see all of those things happen in one dynamic space, and then they can add the other elements and really grow their business from there. So how are we bringing people in? We're not specifically bringing people in, but as they call, as we get leads on them, we're definitely encouraging them to look. We're helping connect them with building owners. And then, as you saw, we only have 4% vacancy, so there really isn't a lot, and there's not a lot of big space. The other really big market right now is for warehouse space, but we just don't have it here, and we won't ever have it here because it's like the Amazons and the Zappos. They're looking for huge, huge warehouses.
I just want to ask one quick follow-up. based on that, because we are very fortunate. We do have a really low vacancy. Do you, as you are planning for the town in the next 10 years, do you try to target a percentage of growth? Like we would love to see an additional 10% of office be built in town to maintain this growth and a steady bottom line.
So as a staff member, we don't really target that. Again, it would go on to needing that extra development, right? So if we say we need 10% more office developed, it wouldn't necessarily be our practice to go out and try and recruit a developer to come through with an office project. So as far as planning on the growth, there's not a lot staff would do to plan where office would go. We could look from a policy perspective of protecting our office zones or looking at ways to provide policy that opens those up to a specific group of businesses. But I don't foresee us actually looking at real office development.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner.
This report's fantastic, and I think it's extremely useful for us in terms of thinking about where to go forward with this, because, you know, on the one hand, I think about the town as sort of a net exporter of innovation. We have so many people who live in town who have started companies and grown them elsewhere because we don't have that opportunity. So the idea of having this R&D flex space, and I would encourage thinking not only about tech, but also biotech and life sciences, med tech, digital health, which is kind of the combination of all of that, I think it's a great opportunity. So I think that there's the opportunity to go after and attract an incubator and an accelerator and making it into an innovation center if we have the right kind of space, you know, available to do that and the right way of thinking about it. So I think it's exciting to see the trends come together. On the downside, I'm a bit worried and kind of shocked about the sales tax issue. You know, this shows that we are 15 out of 16 in the bottom of the Bay Area and of Santa Clara County, and our growth is actually negative in sales tax. Has this been a consistent pattern, or was this just one snapshot that's an aberration?
So this is a pattern that probably started, if I'm off the top of my head, towards the end of 2014 and into 2015. It's kind of why some of those policy questions started coming forward to the Planning Commission and to the Council. 2 years ago, the Council adopted the strategic goal of an economic vitality plan, and we really started diving down and looking at what the market's doing in other places. You know, we hear nonstop that Campbell is taking a lot of our business. Well, I think that could be true as far as some restaurants, but we still have this shopping district that's really unique. So what we try to do from a staff perspective is really drill down on what do these sales tax numbers mean, and then what's prohibiting, we went out and asked some of the businesses who just went through the process, what was that process like for you? We hear it's long, it's a lot, it's hard to understand, and that is my role to help them walk through the code and understand, but it's a confusing thing to do. So the other thing is just opening up, and I don't want to say opening up our policies like it's a free-for-all, but finding ways to have flexibility or short-term flexibility to see if that is what will tip the scale, if that will start to wiggle who comes in, who's interested. And I think the policy committee has done a lot of great work. There's things on their work plan that's moving towards that. And that's really, I think, how we're going to test the waters to see, is it geographical why this is happening, or is it something that we're doing that we could actually be more inviting? I will say, kind of in the back of Commissioner Birch's question, so for your own knowledge, I do not recruiting, but what we'll do is we'll send out vacancies to brokers to say, hey, can you share this with your with your clients, or do you know anybody that would be interested in this space? So it's less about really recruiting, but we do share those vacancies kind of region-wide. We meet monthly with an economic development group, and we often talk about, who's looking to expand. We never poach from town to town, but we're always there to help if there's an expansion or a move need.
Go ahead.
I also wanted to thank you for your presentation. It was very helpful. You mentioned about commercial office space, and so this is sort of a hypothetical question, but is there, if we had an infinite amount of space to build commercial office space, I mean, would we be able to have people to come in and lease it? It sounded like that answer to that was yes, because for the few parcels of land where we have the opportunity, there's been a few requests to maybe change the zoning from one to the other, from residential. And so then my second part of my question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, is when I worked on the housing element, I went to a couple county-wide meetings, and I consistently heard that there's way more office space than there is residential, places for people to live, not so much here, but in like Mountain View, for example. So do you see that the focus should be more on building up our commercial office space, or do we need to also balance it with the residential?
I think your point is very fundamentally and mathematically spot on. So we, meaning a region, continues to build office and doesn't build homes to support it. What we're going to see is that supply and demand, the supply drops, the demand comes up, and we're going to see those costs of homes continue to rise. So there definitely is a need for residential that supports that office. I think secondary, which didn't make the presentation, but the other real secondary draw in this region is hotel. So that came out of this same study, is that, people are coming here, they're coming to do business all week, they're coming to enjoy the environment on the weekends, the shopping, the weather, whatever it is, the sports. And so there really is a need for more accommodations that are temporary as well. So I think that, yes, the question, kind of to answer your question, yes, we would need residential to support that office, but there's also that need for temporary kind of housing in the form of a hotel.
Excellent. Any other questions for Monica? Oh, yes. Vice Mayor Rennie.
I'm not sure it's a question. I guess I wanted to comment on some of this. As a council member, I get a chance to go to conferences and luncheons with speakers and dinners with speakers, and over I keep hearing that the success of retail nowadays is it has to be a unique experience. And I've heard Los Gatos used as the example a lot of times, that we've got a unique experience that keep people coming. But the world's changing, and everybody, if we're the competitor to emulate, people are going to find a way to chip away at us, and we won't be so great and different anymore. So, my first thought is we need to keep moving ourselves to stay ahead. We can't rest on our laurels. But the thing I still think to focus on is the unique experience. And you've got a bunch of bubbles, many of them sort of in the middle, are things that they're new ideas, they're new unique things, and they don't fit into our ordinances very well. And that's where we need to quickly get with it and find a way to fit them in, because they help keep us unique and bringing people in that then support the retail. I think there was some discussion of office nearby that could then walk to downtown. That's good. There's always the question of how many more restaurants do we let into town. As you said, Campbell's stealing from us restaurants, but they're not a shopping district. We still want to stay the shopping district that we are. There may be space to add some more food, because that you saw on the chart, actually, I was surprised Los Gatos was not at 100% on restaurants, meaning more people are leaving Los Gatos to go to a restaurant than are coming in, which is sort of surprising if you think about it, because you think of coming to Los Gatos for restaurants. So it's things that I think support that. The other thing that we don't think about much, and it's kind of hard to do it, is what are the things that also support the financial base of Los Gatos. Now that I'm on the finance committee, I'm thinking more, we have pension liabilities and so forth. If we, the idea of an exciting incubator sounds great, and, it brings the buzz to Los Gatos. I wonder, though, bringing a lot of office space, does that bring more cost to the town, or does it bring more income to the town? Because, they don't pay any sales tax. Hotels would be great because we just upped our TOT tax. I think you mentioned hotels are needed. That, so there's that dimension to the whole thing. And then maybe it's not appropriate to comment yet. I was going to say something about the industrial. We have a light industrial zone that's zoned that way to protect some of the businesses that are in it. Like, we like the idea that you can get your car fixed nearby. If we change the rules too much, the space may become too expensive for somebody to run their auto repair business, and we run out of town and we lose some of this. In Los Gatos, I think we try to provide a lot of the services for people in town so they don't have to go other places. So we want to, as we think about changing that, for flex or some of the things, we need to be careful not to run out some of our diversity.
I do have a couple follow-up comments for you. The experience thing that you said in the beginning actually was how a couple of the surveys that I read, they all mentioned it, is that number one, above everything, shoppers are valuing experience more than anything these days. And so and they want a seamless experience that can go from online to in-store. So can I buy it online? Is it shipped to me? Can I return it in the store for free? Are you nice when I bring it in? Can I order it online and pick it up in the store? They're looking for the experience of feeling like they are a special shopper. So that is something that we've definitely seen. I think that to the point about the restaurants being, we're having leakage. I think there's several reasons why that can be. Anecdotally, what I hear all the time is we don't have those large open areas for people to be outside. This is an environment, with the exception of the last couple weeks, where people want to be outside. They want gathering areas where there's 2 or 3 restaurants in a row that share an outdoor space. So that's it's that sharing of space that I think the trend, whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's in a workplace environment, it's the ability to share and to meet with other people that kind of drives the interest at this current point in the market.
Madam Mayor?
All these questions I find are very helpful, and I think our purpose for this segment of our meeting is to provide you the context of the issues that we're grappling with, not only when you're looking at your individual applications, but also to encourage you that if these are areas that you are interested in, the policy committee is looking at what are some of the small changes we can do to accommodate these changes in trends. Our finance committee is looking at long-term sustainability, and as members of our commission, you are all welcome to attend those as residents. And one of the things that I have asked other commissioners in other commissions to do is feel free to utilize these resources so that as you're looking at your own individual applications, you have the broader context of the issues that we're grappling with.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments? Let's move towards public comment and verbal communication.
So we do have only one card. Carrie DeChico? Okay. And one is coming.
Shannon will help you.
Will you help me? Just put it on there. Hi. Hello. My name is Carrie DeChico. I live on Almendra. And I kind of was hoping to get answers while I was listening to the discussion, and I think I'm still really confused, but what the heck, I've been here this whole time, so I'm going to say it anyway. I'm going to keep it brief. I wasn't really planning on attending a meeting, but some of the things to be discussed kind of caught my eye, and I heard it mentioned here a lot, neighborhood compatibility, and wasting everyone's time when things go back and forth. So I've been trying to get really smart on some things because there's a development going in right behind my house. I reviewed the general plan, the residential guidelines, the commercial guidelines, the 225 suggestion rule guideline. I'm a little hesitant as to what to call that. And compatibility is mentioned numerous times in numerous documents. But what does compatibility mean in terms of an interface of commercial and historical property? What does that look like, and where can I go to further educate myself? That was kind of the question that I had. If you look at this picture, you'll see the numbers. Houses 12, 13, 14, and 15 are on Almendra. We are all built between 1910 and 1930. We're part of the Almond Grove, and we adhere to really strict residential guidelines, and we're happy to do so. We love living there. You can see what the proposed McCarthy development will do in the back, in totally eliminating the historical character of our homes that it abuts. We are attached by a 1-foot wall. That's all that separates us. It's a very massive glass modern building. Now, in this picture, in my own property at 238 Almendra, this is what this depicts. This is looking from my office, my backyard, out. Here is a carriage house that was built in 1912. Sorry, here's a carriage house built in 1912. You'll see that everything in color is the new development, the new building. Everything in white is my backyard. We have an And I'm sorry, is it DeSico? DeSico, okay. So what I'll ask, because this is a pending application, I will ask staff to talk with you since we're not able to communicate on this specifically. That'd be great. Okay. So Joel, can I email you or I don't want to put you on the spot, but to give me guidance.
Sure.
Okay.
That's perfectly fine. I know you've had multiple contacts with our staff, but definitely reach out to me.
All right, great. Thanks.
Angelia Dorner, sorry.
Someone's going to think that we shared notes. We didn't. Hello, Angelia Dorner, proud resident of the Almond Grove. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. I think we all need to take a step back. First off, we really need to look at downtown separately from the rest of Los Gatos. Downtown is owned by 4 or 5 primary landowners or families, and the rules and what's going on there is very different than what might be happening elsewhere. I think my comments primarily relate to downtown. What do we want to be? What is our welcoming message? Too often we focus on the next 2 questions about how we get people to stay and come back, but we forget about what we want people to remember. This is language out of a EMC and consulting architect report that says we need to look to make sure that it doesn't degrade the existing visual character or quality of the site and its surroundings. When we're talking about a gateway to downtown Los Gatos, it needs to have an idea of the village scale and character, and the buildings need to keep in the small town character of Los Gatos, should visually blend in with the existing architecture. And so I'd like you to just look for a moment, because this is not my primary thing. This is the same development that Carrie just referred to, the corner of Highway 9 and Santa Cruz. Looking at it from in front of Chase Bank. Looking at it driving west, looking over your left shoulder. Driving east into town. And I ask you, how are they able to say there was no impact on the gateway of downtown with this particular development? But what I'd really like to talk about is downtown. The two items that we keep coming up with. How can we get folks to stay, and how can we get folks to come back? One of the things that I'm sick and tired of hearing about from certain chamber people is that everything is vacant, vacant, vacant. I really wanted to talk about things that I know personally have happened recently related to vacancies or retailers leaving downtown. Everybody cries over missing Domus. Their lease came up and their rent was tripled. That's why they had to leave. At the same time, I don't know exactly the details, with the coffee roasting company, they had the same kind of rent scare or rent scam that they had to do some fancy negotiating to stay in business. Lamborghini, they ran out of their lease in the middle of the night, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. They loaded up their cars and took off because the conditions of the place where the rain was coming in and hitting their cars. Chocolate Dream Box, Out of the Envelope, Tassels. Thank God they're all still in town, only 2 still downtown, but primarily because of conditions. C.B. Hannigan's, let me at least get this one in there. The new lessee must pay a minimum of $1 million leasehold improvements in order to enter into a lease. That is what is going on.
Ms. Dorner, I'm going to have to cut you off now, but thank you. And if you'd like to submit that, just feel free to hand it to our clerk.
I will, and just look at that.
And I have no further cards, so I'll close our verbal comments and our public comments. Dr. Spano, would you like me to close? Okay. Well, I wanted to thank all of you for your attendance tonight. One thing, as Vice Mayor said, the opportunity to learn what other municipalities are doing, and they do meet with their commissions on a regular basis, and I thought it was a good idea for us to touch base as well. When Chair O'Donnell and I were talking about the various issues to talk about, I think the underlying message we would like to get across is we're all working towards the same direction, and let's just make sure we're on that same page and we're conveying the same message, because ultimately we're all working hard to achieve the success of our town, and we just want to make sure that you understand we thank you for the work you do.